Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into something that has been lost to time, a sacred practice where ancient women travelled hundreds of miles, not to temples of gold or monuments of power, but to places where they could simply sleep. And in that sleep, they found something our modern world has forgotten, that dreams were not just random images in the night, but doorways to healing. This is the story of the sleep temples, where for over 4,000 years, women went to be cured not by medicine or surgery, but by the visions that came to them in the darkness. Tonight, you will discover why this ancient art vanished, and why perhaps we need it now more than ever. So before we step into this forgotten world together, I want to ask you something. If this story speaks to you tonight, if it touches something deep inside, would you take just a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a like? But only if it truly resonates with you. I want to know, where are you right now as you listen to this? Are you in bed in the dark, ready for sleep? Or perhaps you are somewhere else seeking a moment of peace? Drop a comment and tell me. And now, let us dim the lights. Let the world around you soften, and together, let us walk back through time to a place where sleep was sacred and dreams could heal. Imagine this. It is a warm evening in ancient Greece, sometime around 350 BCE. The sun is setting behind the mountains of the Peloponnese, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. A woman, let us call her Helena, has been walking for 3 days. Her feet are dusty and sore. She has travelled almost 100 miles from her home in Athens, following a winding path that thousands before her have taken. She is not going to a market. She is not visiting family. She is going to a place called Epidaurus, to a sanctuary that people whisper about in hushed, reverent tones. She is going there to sleep, and in that sleep she hopes to find what no physician in Athens could give her, a cure for the pain that has lived in her body for years, the kind of pain that doctors today might call chronic, might call psychosomatic, might struggle to explain at all. Helena is not alone. As she walks the final stretch of the sacred road, she sees other pilgrims. Some are old, leaning on walking sticks, some are young, their faces tight with worry, and many like her are women carrying burdens that the waking world cannot see, women seeking something that our modern hospitals with all their machines and pills have forgotten how to provide. This is not a fairy tale, this is history. For more than 4,000 years across the ancient world, from Egypt to Greece to Rome, there existed places called sleep temples, dream temples, healing sanctuaries where people went not for potions or incantations, but for something far more mysterious, to receive healing through their dreams. And at the heart of this ancient practice, often overlooked in the history books, were women. Women as seekers, women as priestesses, women as the interpreters of dreams, the keepers of this sacred knowledge. Let me take you deeper into this world, because what happened in these temples was not superstition. It was not primitive. In many ways, it was more sophisticated than much of what we do today. The tradition begins in Egypt over 4,000 years ago. There was a man named Imhotep. You might recognize that name if you have ever watched a certain mummy movie, though the real Imhotep was nothing like Hollywood portrayed him. He was a priest, a physician, an architect. He served as chancellor and high priest of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis, and the ancient Egyptians worshipped him. They built temples in his honor, temples where the sick came to sleep and dream. These were the first sleep temples, the earliest known practice of what we might call dream healing, or, in more clinical terms, therapeutic hypnosis. The Egyptians understood something profound, that sleep was not just rest. It was a sacred state. a time when the boundaries between the human and the divine grew thin. In their sleep temples, people underwent purification rituals, fasting, prayers. Then they would lie down in special chambers, and priests and priestesses would chant, would create a trance-like state, and then they would wait. Wait for the gods to visit, wait for Imhotep, or later the god Serapis, to appear in their dreams and offer healing. Sometimes the healing was direct, a miraculous cure upon waking. Sometimes it came as symbolic dreams that needed interpretation. And who did much of this interpretation? Women, priestesses trained in the art of reading dreams, understanding the language of the unconscious long before Freud or Jung. Pentor. But it was in Greece where this practice truly flourished. By the 6th century BCE, a new god had emerged, Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing, and with him came a network of sanctuaries, of sleep temples that spread across the ancient world like a web of healing. At the peak of this movement, there were over 420 temples dedicated to Asclepius, scattered across the Greek Empire and beyond. Over 200 Asclepiae, as they were called, from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Rome. Millions of people over centuries made pilgrimages to these places, and Epidaurus, the sanctuary Helena is walking toward in our story, was the most famous of them all. Now here is what fascinates me, and what I think will fascinate you too. These were not just spiritual places, they were in a very real sense hospitals. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of sophisticated medical facilities, baths, exercise areas, even something resembling surgery rooms. But the heart of the healing was not physical treatment. It was enkoimesis, the sacred sleep. And the people who guided this process, who held the knowledge of how to facilitate these healing dreams, were not just priests, they were priestesses. Women who had undergone rigorous training, who studied religious texts, astronomy, medicine, and most importantly, the art of dream interpretation. Let me paint you a picture of what these women were. In ancient Greece, they were called hieria. They were not subservient or hidden away. They were powerful, respected. They held public office, received salaries from the city, had reserved seats in theatres alongside politicians and generals. When they died, they were honoured with elaborate state funerals and commemorative statues. Can you imagine? 4,000 years ago there were women in positions of spiritual and medical authority, women whose expertise was not just tolerated but celebrated, whose wisdom was sought by people from all walks of life. And it was not just in Greece. In ancient Egypt, priestesses served in the temples of Hathor and Isis, goddesses associated with healing and magic. These women were experts in dream interpretation, in the sacred arts of reading what we might now call the unconscious mind. In the Hittite civilization, there were women called Hasawa. The word itself means she of birth. These were healers, diviners, mysterious priestesses who analyzed problems with the help of animals, stars, and dreams. They would tell the gods about their patients' ailments and receive answers on how to heal them. But they were also educated in medicine, in psychology. They understood something very wise. By placing the responsibility on the deity, they protected themselves if the healing did not work, but also created a powerful placebo effect, a framework of belief that itself became part of the cure. So why am I telling you all this? Why does this matter here tonight as you listen to my voice in the darkness? Because something was lost. Something precious and powerful was taken from us, from women especially. And I think we are only now beginning to understand what that loss has cost us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let us return to Helena, walking those final steps toward Epidaurus. She does not know the history. She does not know that one day this practice will be banned, that the temples will be destroyed, that the knowledge held by the priestesses will be scattered to the winds. All she knows is that she is tired and in pain, and she has heard stories. Stories of miraculous healings. Stories of women who arrived broken and left whole. Stories of dreams that changed lives. She reaches the sanctuary as twilight deepens into night, and what she sees takes her breath away. The sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidaurus is not small. It is vast. Spread across a peaceful valley surrounded by mountains, there are temples, baths, a massive theatre that can hold 14,000 people, a stadium for athletic competitions. But at the centre of it all, almost humble in comparison to the grand architecture around it, is a simple building, a long hall with columns. This is the Abaton, the sacred dormitory, the place where tonight Helena will sleep, the place where tonight she will dream. And in that dream, if the gods are willing, she will find healing. But before she can enter that sacred space, before she can lie down on what the Greeks called the klein, the sacred skin, the holy couch, the word from which we derive our modern word clinic, there is much she must do. There are rituals of purification, preparations of body and mind, ceremonies designed not just to appease the gods, but to prepare her consciousness, to open her to the possibility of healing that might come not from the outside, but from somewhere deep within herself. And this is where we will begin to understand something extraordinary. These ancient people, 4,000 years ago, understood something about the human mind, about healing, about the connection between our psychological state and our physical health, that modern medicine is only now rediscovering. They understood that healing required more than just treating symptoms. It required addressing the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. It required creating the right conditions, the right state of consciousness, the right environment. It required, above all, belief. Not blind superstition, but a framework of meaning that could activate the body's own healing capacities. The sleep temples were not a rejection of medicine. In many ways, they were the birthplace of it. Over centuries, the priests and priestesses of these sanctuaries accumulated vast knowledge. They kept detailed records inscribed on stone tablets of successful healings. They studied patterns. They observed what worked and what did not. Families of physicians began to distinguish themselves in cities like Epidaurus. The line between the miraculous and the medical began to blur, and women were at the centre of this evolution, as healers, as knowledge keepers, as the bridges between the seen and the unseen worlds. Tonight, we have only begun this journey. We have stepped through the gates of Epidaurus with Helena, but we have not yet entered the Abaton. We have not yet experienced the sacred night, the enkoimesis, the dream that heals. We have not yet met the priestesses who will guide Helena through this experience, interpreting her dreams, prescribing her cure. We have not yet discovered why this practice was so powerful, what modern science has to say about it, or why it was ultimately destroyed. But we will. In the next part of our journey, we are going to go even deeper into the past, before Asclepius, before Imhotep, to a time when the temples were dedicated not to gods but to goddesses, to a time when the practice of dream healing was understood fundamentally as feminine wisdom. We are going to discover the sleeping lady of Malta, a mysterious figure from over 5,000 years ago. And we're going to ask a question that the history books rarely ask. What happened to the feminine roots of healing? Why were they forgotten? Or more accurately, why were they erased? So rest now if you are ready for sleep. Let these images drift through your mind. Picture Helena standing at the threshold of the temple. Picture the priestesses walking through those ancient halls, carrying knowledge that has been lost. And know that this story is not over. it's only beginning. Because what these ancient women knew, what they practiced in those sacred temples of sleep, is something we desperately need to remember. And in the parts that follow, we will remember it together. Close your eyes, breathe, and let us continue this journey into the lost art of sleep temples, where ancient women went to heal through dreams. Before we continue with Helena's story, before we step into that sacred abaton where she will finally sleep, I want to take you even further back. Because there is something the history books do not often tell you. Something that was buried quite literally under layers of time and patriarchy. The temples we just visited, the great sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidaurus, the sleep temples of Imhotep in Egypt, they were not the beginning. They were not where this story starts. No, this practice of healing through dreams, this sacred art of sleep, has roots that go much, much deeper. Roots that lead us not to gods but to goddesses, not to priests but to priestesses. And tonight, we are going to unearth those roots and ask a question that makes some people uncomfortable. What if the most powerful healing tradition in human history was, at its origin, a feminine practice? Let me take you to an island, Malta, a tiny speck of land in the Mediterranean Sea, halfway between Sicily and the coast of North Africa. The year is approximately 3200 BCE. That is over 5,000 years ago, before the pyramids of Egypt, before the glory of Greece or Rome, before written history as we know it. And in this ancient place, deep underground, there is a temple. But not the kind of temple you might imagine. This is a hypogeum, a word that means an underground tomb or sanctuary. It is carved into the living rock, a labyrinth of chambers and passages that descend into the earth like a journey into the womb of the world itself. In 1899, workers accidentally discovered this place while building houses, and when archaeologists finally excavated it, when they carefully brushed away the millennia of dust and debris, they found something extraordinary. Among the bones, among the artifacts, among the evidence of rituals we can only guess at, they found a small statue. She is only a few inches long, carved from clay, and she is sleeping. Her body is curved, reclining in a pose that unmistakably suggests deep rest. Her face is serene, peaceful. She has been called the Sleeping Lady of Malta, and she is one of the oldest representations we have of what scholars believe was a priestess engaged in dream incubation. A woman, 5,000 years ago, practicing the sacred art of healing through sleep. Think about that for a moment. 5,000 years. That is 2,000 years before Asclepius. 2,000 years before the Greek temples we just visited. And here is a woman, carved in clay, showing us that this practice, this understanding that sleep and dreams could heal, was already ancient when the Greeks claimed it as their own. But who was she? Was she a priestess, an oracle, a healer? We do not know her name, we will never know her story. But what we do know, what the archaeological evidence strongly suggests, is that the Halsaflieni Hypogeum in Malta was a place of dream healing. A place where people went to sleep underground, surrounded by darkness and stone. And in that liminal space between the living world and the realm of the dead, they sought visions, they sought healing, they sought communion with the divine feminine. And here is what is so important, what I want you to really understand. This was not a temple to a god. The figures found in Malta, the statues and carvings from this period, overwhelmingly depict female forms. Goddesses, mother figures, the great goddess, as some scholars call her, a deity associated with fertility, with birth, with the cycles of life and death and rebirth. And the people who served her, who facilitated these rituals of sleep and dreaming, were almost certainly women. Can you feel the weight of this? Can you sense what was lost? Let me take you forward in time, but still far into the past. We are in the Mycenaean period now, around 1600 to 1100 BCE. This is Bronze Age Greece, the world of heroes and legends, the world that Homer would later immortalize in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And on a hill called Kynorsion, just about a kilometre away from where the great sanctuary of Asclepius would one day stand, there was another sanctuary, a Mycenaean sanctuary. And the deity worshipped there was not Asclepius. It was not Apollo. It was a female goddess, a goddess of fertility. Her name has been lost to time, but her presence has not. Archaeologists have found evidence of continuous worship at this site for 500 years, from the 16th to the 11th century BCE. Do you see the pattern emerging? Before Asclepius, there was Apollo Meleatus, a healing god, yes, but one whose sanctuary was built on the ruins of an even older cult. And before Apollo, there was the goddess, the unnamed, forgotten goddess whose temple was there first. This is not speculation, this is archaeology. This is the physical evidence that tells us a story the written histories tried to erase, that the healing sanctuaries, the places where people went to be cured, were originally dedicated to feminine divine power. Now, I want to tell you about a group of women who almost disappeared from history entirely. They were called the Hasawa. This is a word from the Hittite language. The Hittites were a powerful civilization that flourished in what is now Turkey, around the same time as ancient Egypt and Mycenaean Greece, and Hasawa means she of birth. At first, scholars thought this referred simply to midwives, but as they studied the texts, as they pieced together fragments of clay tablets and temple records, they realized the Hasawa were far more than that. They were healers, diviners, priestesses. They were quite possibly one of the most influential priestess organizations in the ancient world. Let me tell you what a Hasawa did. When someone came to her with an illness, with a problem, she did not just offer herbs or prayers. She analysed the situation through dreams, through observing animals, through reading the stars. She would tell the gods about the patient's ailments and claim to receive divine guidance on the cure. Now, you might think this sounds purely mystical, purely superstitious, but here is the brilliant part. The Hasawa were also educated in real medicine. They knew about the human body, they understood psychology, and they understood something that even modern doctors sometimes forget. That a patient's belief in the treatment is itself part of the cure. By placing the responsibility on the deity, by saying, "The gods will heal you," the Hasawa protected themselves if the treatment failed. But more importantly, they created a framework of hope, of expectation, that activated the patient's own healing mechanisms. They were practicing what we now call the placebo effect, what we now understand as the mind-body connection, thousands of years before we had the scientific language to describe it. And they were women, powerful, respected, feared even. The rituals they performed were demanding, complex. They could only do a limited number each day because the work drained them. And later, when new religions came, when patriarchy tightened its grip, these women would be called something else. They would be called witches, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let us stay in this ancient world a little longer, because I want you to understand not just that women practiced healing through dreams, but why. Why were women seen as the natural interpreters of dreams? Why were they the ones who could bridge the gap between the conscious and unconscious worlds? In many ancient cultures, there was a belief that women had a special connection to the mysteries of life and death. This was not just because women gave birth, though that was certainly part of it. It was because women's bodies followed cycles that mirrored the cycles of nature, the moon, the tides, the seasons. Ancient people observed this and saw something sacred in it. They believed that women, because of these cycles, because of their ability to create life, were closer to the divine, closer to the hidden patterns of existence, and dreams, they understood, were part of those hidden patterns. Dreams came from the same mysterious place where life itself came from, the dark, the unseen, the unconscious. So when someone needed to understand a dream, when they needed healing that came through visions in the night, they went to women, to priestesses who had trained for years in the sacred arts, yes, but also to women who were simply recognized as having the gift, the intuition, the ability to see what others could not see. Now, what happened to all of this? How did we get from a world where women were the primary healers, the dream interpreters, the priestesses of sleep temples, to a world where that role was taken over by men and eventually banned altogether? The shift happened gradually over centuries. As Greek culture evolved, as philosophy and what we might call rational thought began to dominate, there was a slow but steady move away from goddess worship toward god worship. Apollo, the sun god, the god of reason and light and order, began to overshadow the older, darker, more mysterious feminine deities. And when Asclepius emerged as the god of healing, and remember, Asclepius was the son of Apollo, the sanctuaries began to shift. Not overnight, not completely. Women still served as priestesses. The hieria, as we talked about earlier, still held positions of power and respect, but the balance had tipped. The temples were no longer primarily feminine spaces. They were becoming more masculine, more structured, more controlled. And yet even in this shift, even as the old goddess temples were replaced or absorbed, the core practice remained. Enkoimesis, the sacred sleep, the healing dream, because it worked, whatever you want to call it, divine intervention, the power of suggestion, the activation of the body's natural healing mechanisms, it worked. People came from across the known world to sleep in these temples and they left cured, or at least comforted. The inscriptions, the iamata, the healing testimonies carved in stone, these were not religious propaganda. Well, not entirely. They were records, evidence, proof that something real was happening in those sacred nights. But here is what fascinates me most. What keeps me awake at night thinking about these ancient women. They knew something we have forgotten. They knew that healing is not just about fixing what is broken. It is about creating wholeness. It is about addressing the seen and the unseen, the body and the spirit, the conscious and the unconscious. They knew that a woman in pain, whether that pain is physical or emotional or spiritual, cannot be healed by the medicine alone. She needs to be held in a sacred space. She needs ritual. She needs meaning. She needs to feel that her suffering matters, that someone is listening, that the universe itself is paying attention. And for thousands of years, that is what the sleep temples provided. A place where women could bring their pain, their fear, their deepest needs, and trust that they would be met with wisdom and compassion. A place where other women, priestesses who had walked their own paths of initiation and understanding, would guide them through the darkness and into the healing light of their own dreams. I wonder sometimes what those conversations were like. When a woman woke from her enkoimesis, from her sacred sleep, and told her dream to the priestess who was waiting there, did she speak in whispers? Did she cry? Did the priestess hold her hand and say, "Yes, I understand, I've seen this before"? We do not have those conversations recorded. We have the inscriptions of miraculous cures, yes, but we do not have the intimate moments, the human moments, the moments when one woman's suffering was witnessed and validated by another woman who knew, who understood, who had dedicated her life to this sacred work of healing. Those moments are lost to us, but their echo remains in the stones of Epidaurus, in the clay of the sleeping lady, in the fragments of Hittite texts that mention the Hasawa. In every archaeological site where we find evidence of these ancient practices, we are finding echoes of a world where women's wisdom was not just tolerated but revered. So why am I telling you all of this? Why does it matter that these temples were original feminine spaces, that the goddesses came before the gods, that women were the first dream workers and healers? Because we live in a world that has forgotten this. We live in a world where healing is clinical, mechanical, impersonal, where dreams are dismissed as random neural firing with no meaning or purpose, where women's intuition is mocked or ignored, where the idea that sleep itself could be sacred, that rest could be a spiritual practice seems laughable. We have gained so much with modern medicine, with science, with technology, but we have also lost something, and I think that loss is costing us more than we realize. In the next part of our journey, we are going to follow Helena again. We are going to watch as she prepares to enter the Abaton. We are going to see the rituals of purification, the baths and fasts and prayers that transform her from a weary traveller into a sacred pilgrim ready to receive healing. We are going to understand why these preparations were not just religious theatre, but psychological techniques designed to shift her consciousness, to open her to possibilities that her rational mind would normally dismiss. And we are going to discover that what seems like ancient superstition might actually be ancient wisdom, wisdom that modern science is only now beginning to validate. So stay with me, keep your eyes soft, your breath slow. Let these images of ancient priestesses and sleeping ladies and sacred temples drift through your mind like dreams themselves. Because we are peeling back layers of history, layers of forgetting, to reveal something that was always there, waiting to be remembered. The lost art of sleep temples, the feminine roots of healing, the power of dreams to transform not just our sleep but our lives. We return now to Helena, standing at the edge of the sanctuary as evening deepens into night. Her journey has been long, 3 days of walking dusty roads, uncertain hope. But she is not done yet. In fact, she has barely begun. Because entering a sleep temple was never as simple as just lying down and closing your eyes. No, there was a process, a transformation. Ancient people understood something that we have forgotten, that healing requires preparation, that you cannot step directly from the chaos of ordinary life into the sacred space of dreams without first crossing a threshold, without first shedding the weight of the world you carry on your shoulders. And so before Helena can enter the Abaton, before she can sleep and dream and hope for healing, she must undergo what the ancients called purification. And tonight, we are going to walk through this process with her, step by step, and discover why these rituals were not just religious ceremony, but profound psychological preparation. The first thing Helena must do is bathe. But this is not an ordinary bath. Near the sanctuary there is a spring, cold, clear water flowing from deep within the mountain. The Greeks called this process chernips, or lustration, a word that means cleansing, washing away not just physical dirt but spiritual impurity. Helena removes her travelling clothes, the garments that have absorbed 3 days of sweat and dust and road grime. She steps into the water, and the shock of cold makes her gasp. Her skin prickles, her heart pounds, and something shifts. Do you know that feeling? When cold water hits your body and suddenly you are awake, present, alive, in a way you were not a moment before, that is what this bath does. It jolts her out of the haze of travel, out of the endless loop of worry that has occupied her mind for miles. It brings her into her body, into the now. The priestesses are watching. They are always watching, these women who have dedicated their lives to this work. One of them, let us call her Thea, a name that means divine, approaches with a clean white robe. She does not speak, not yet. The silence is intentional. After Helena dries herself and puts on the robe, Thea leads her to another part of the sanctuary, to a small temple where offerings are made. Here, Helena must make her sacrifice. Now, before you imagine something gruesome, understand that for most pilgrims, this meant a small animal, a chicken, a dove, sometimes just honey cakes or wine poured out as libation. The point was not the value of the offering. The point was the act itself, the physical gesture of giving something up, of saying to the gods and to yourself, I am ready to let go, I am ready to receive. Helena has brought a small dove in a wicker cage. She purchased it from a vendor on the road, saving her coins for this moment. Thea takes the bird gently. There is a quick, practiced movement, and it is done. The blood is caught in a bronze bowl poured onto the altar, and Helena feels something release inside her chest. It is a strange feeling, both sad and relieved. The dove is gone, but something in her has shifted. A bargain has been struck. A commitment has been made. Now comes the fasting. Helena has not eaten since dawn, and she will not eat again until after her enkoimesis, after her sacred sleep. By the time she lies down tonight, she will have gone without food for perhaps 18 to 20 hours. Why? What is the point of hunger in a healing ritual? Well, ancient cultures all over the world have understood something that modern science is now confirming, that fasting changes consciousness. When your body is deprived of food, when your blood sugar drops and your digestive system quiets, something happens to your brain. You become more receptive, more sensitive. The veil between waking and dreaming grows thinner. Your dreams become more vivid, more intense, more memorable. The ancient priestesses did not need laboratory studies to know this. They learned it through centuries of observation, through trial and error, through the accumulated wisdom of women who had guided thousands of pilgrims through this process. But Helena is not just hungry, she is also tired, bone tired. 3 days of walking will do that. And this too is part of the preparation, because sleep deprivation, mild sleep deprivation, also changes consciousness. It makes you more susceptible to suggestion, more open to altered states. When you are exhausted, your rational mind, the part of you that questions and doubts and analyzes, that part grows quiet. And other parts, the intuitive, the imaginative, the dreaming parts, those come forward. Are you starting to see what is happening here? The bath, the sacrifice, the fasting, the exhaustion, these are not random religious requirements. They are a carefully designed system for altering consciousness, for preparing someone to have an experience that their ordinary everyday mind would resist or dismiss. The ancient priestesses were, in a very real sense, practicing a form of what we now call hypnosis. They were inducing a trance state, a receptive state, a state in which healing becomes possible not because the gods reach down from heaven, but because the person's own mind opens to possibilities it normally keeps locked away. Thea leads Helena to another spring, smaller than the first. This one is famous for its mineral content. Pilgrims drink from it, believing it has sacred properties. And perhaps it does, though not in the way they imagine. We know now that mineral-rich water can have genuine therapeutic effects. Magnesium, for instance, which would have been present in the limestone springs of Epidaurus, helps with muscle relaxation, reduces anxiety, improves sleep quality. The ancients did not know the chemistry, but they knew the effect. They knew that pilgrims who drank from this spring slept more deeply, dreamed more vividly. Helena cups her hands, drinks deeply. The water is cool, slightly metallic, and it settles in her empty stomach like a blessing. Now Thea speaks for the first time. Her voice is low, melodic. She tells Helena about Asclepius, about his power to heal, about the thousands who have come to this place and left cured. She tells specific stories, a woman who could not walk who danced after one night in the Abaton, a man blind from birth who saw his daughter's face for the first time, a child with a withered arm who woke with full strength restored. Are these stories true? Some of them might be. Some of them are certainly exaggerated, but that is not the point. The point is what the stories do to Helena's mind. They create expectation. They build belief. They say, healing is possible. It happens here. It could happen to you. This is not manipulation, or if it is manipulation in service of healing. Because we know, and this is well-established modern science, that expectation affects outcome. If you believe a treatment will work, it's more likely to work. This is the placebo effect, and it is powerful. Studies have shown that placebo treatments can reduce pain, improve mobility, even affect measurable physiological markers like inflammation and immune response. The ancient priestesses understood this intuitively. They knew that part of their job was not just to interpret dreams, but to cultivate the psychological conditions that made healing possible. But there is more. Thea now leads Helena to the theatre. Yes, the theatre. That massive, beautiful structure that can hold 14,000 people and is famous for its perfect acoustics. It is evening now and there is a performance. Not a play exactly, but a ritual drama. Actors dressed as gods and heroes enact stories of healing, stories of suffering transformed into redemption. Music plays, the soft, haunting sound of the lyre, that seven-stringed instrument sacred to Apollo. The acoustics of the theatre are so perfect that even the quietest note can be heard clearly in the highest seats. And Helena, sitting among other pilgrims, feels the music enter her body, feels it vibrate in her chest, in her bones. Have you ever experienced this? Music so perfectly performed in a space so precisely designed that it does not just sound good, it physically moves you, that it changes something in your nervous system. The ancient Greeks built the theatre at Epidaurus around 330 BCE, and modern archaeologists still marvel at its acoustic properties. Sound waves bounce off the limestone seats in such a way that there is virtually no echo, no distortion. Just pure, clear sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Why is this part of the healing process? Because music, rhythm, sound, these things affect our brains in profound ways. They can calm anxiety, induce trance states, create emotional catharsis. The ritual drama Helena watches is not entertainment, it is therapy. It is showing her in symbolic form that suffering can be transformed, that heroes fall and rise again, that the gods care about human pain, and as she watches, as the music washes over her, her nervous system begins to shift out of the state of stress and fear she has carried for so long and into something else, something quieter, calmer, more open. There is one more element to this preparation, and it is the most mysterious: scent. The sanctuary at Epidaurus was famous for its orange trees. Even today, the village of Archaea Epidavros is known for the intoxicating perfume of orange blossoms that fills the air in spring. But in ancient times there were other scents too. Incense burned in the temples, herbal fumigations in the sleeping chambers. Some scholars believe that opium may have been used, though the evidence is uncertain. What is certain is that smell, more than any other sense, connects directly to the parts of our brain associated with memory and emotion. A scent can transport you instantly to another time, another place, another state of mind. The priestesses knew this. They used fragrance deliberately, strategically, to create an atmosphere that felt sacred, otherworldly, set apart from ordinary life. So by the time Thea finally leads Helena toward the Abaton, toward the sacred sleeping chamber, Helena is no longer the same woman who arrived at sunset. She has been bathed, purified. She has made her offering. She has fasted. She has listened to stories of miracles. She has experienced music that moved her soul. She has breathed in fragrances that made her feel she was stepping out of the mundane world and into something holy. She is tired, hungry, emotionally open, and psychologically primed. She is, in other words, in exactly the state of consciousness the priestesses have been cultivating, a state where healing becomes possible, where dreams can break through the barriers of the rational mind and speak their strange symbolic truths. Compare this to how we approach healing in the modern world. You feel pain, you make an appointment. You sit in a waiting room under fluorescent lights, flipping through old magazines. A doctor you have never met before spends 7 minutes with you, barely making eye contact, and writes a prescription. You go to a pharmacy, pick up a bottle of pills and swallow them dutifully, alone in your kitchen. There is no ritual, no preparation, no sense that this moment of seeking healing is sacred, important, worthy of ceremony and attention. Is it any wonder that so many modern treatments feel hollow? That we take our medicine but do not feel healed? The ancient approach was different. It honoured the journey. It recognised that healing is not just a physical process, but a psychological and spiritual one. It understood that for treatment to truly work, the whole person must be engaged, body, mind, emotions, spirit. And it created a framework, a series of rituals and experiences designed to engage all of those levels at once. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This all sounds nice, but it's just the placebo effect, right? It is not real healing. But here is the thing, the placebo effect is real healing. When your brain believes you are being healed, it activates genuine physiological processes. It releases endorphins and other natural pain relievers. It modulates immune function. It reduces inflammation. It triggers cellular repair mechanisms. The healing is not imaginary. It is just coming from within rather than from an external source. And maybe, just maybe, that is the whole point. Maybe what the ancient priestesses understood, what the Yi were trying to teach through all these rituals and preparations, is that we carry the power to heal within ourselves. That the role of the healer is not to cure us, but to help us access our own innate capacity for healing. To create the conditions, physical, psychological, spiritual, where that inner healer can emerge. Helena stands now at the entrance to the Abaton. The long stone building stretches before her, dim and mysterious. Inside, she knows other pilgrims are already lying on their sacred couches, their clines, beginning their journey into sleep and dreams. The air smells of incense and herbs. She can hear the faint sound of water. There is a fountain somewhere nearby, its gentle burble designed to soothe. Thea places a hand on her shoulder, a gesture both comforting and commanding. The god is waiting, Thea whispers. Go now and sleep. And when you dream, remember everything. Every image, every word, every sensation. In the morning you will tell me, and together we will understand what Asclepius wishes you to know. Helena nods. She is ready, or as ready as she will ever be. She steps through the doorway into the Abaton, into the sacred darkness where healing happens. And we are going to follow her. Because in the next part of our journey, we are finally going to experience the enkoimesis itself, the sacred sleep, the healing dream. We are going to discover what actually happened in those mysterious nights, what the pilgrims experienced, what the inscriptions recorded. We are going to meet the serpents, yes, actual sacred snakes that lived in the temple. We are going to descend into the underground labyrinth of the Tholos, that circular building with passages that wind like a maze beneath the earth. and we are going to understand as much as we can from this distance of millennia what it felt like to lie in the darkness and wait for a god to visit you in your dreams. So breathe, let your body soften. Imagine yourself walking through that doorway with Helena, leaving behind the lit world of waking and stepping into the shadowed realm of sleep. The preparation is complete. The threshold has been crossed. Now comes the mystery. Now comes the healing. Now comes the dream. The darkness inside the Abaton is not complete. There are oil lamps burning, but they are few and placed low so the light barely reaches above ankle height. It creates an effect that is disorienting, almost dreamlike. You can see enough to navigate, but not enough to feel fully awake. Helena's eyes adjust slowly as Thea guides her deeper into the long stone hall. The ceiling is supported by columns, and in the dim light they seem to stretch endlessly like a forest of stone. The air is cool and smells of something herbal, something sweet and slightly medicinal. Incense, yes, but also something else. Later, Helena will wonder if it was opium smoke, though she will never be certain. All she knows is that breathing in this air makes her feel lighter, as if the weight she has carried for so long is beginning to dissolve. Along the walls of the Abaton, there are couches. The Greeks called them clines, a word we still use today when we talk about a clinic, though I doubt most people realize they are invoking an ancient healing bed every time they visit their doctor. Each cline is covered with animal skins. Not just any skins, but specific ones. Goat skins, most commonly, from animals that were sacrificed to Asclepius. The pilgrims lie down on these skins because they are considered sacred, imbued with the god's power. But there is also something deeply practical about this choice. Animal skins are warm, comfortable. They create a sensory experience that is different from an ordinary bed. When Helena lies down on hers, she feels the texture of the fur against her skin through her thin robe, and it reminds her that this is not a normal night. This is something other. Thea helps Helena settle onto her cline. There are perhaps 20 other pilgrims in the Abaton tonight, some already asleep or appearing to be, others lying very still with their eyes open, staring at nothing. No one speaks. The silence is profound, broken only by the sound of water. There is indeed a fountain somewhere in the building, its gentle trickling designed to induce a meditative state. And there is another sound too, one that Helena does not immediately recognize. A soft rustling, a whisper of movement across stone. She turns ahead and sees it. A snake, not a small garden snake, but a substantial serpent, perhaps 4 feet long, moving slowly along the floor near the wall. And then another, and another. Now, if you have a fear of snakes, this might sound like your worst nightmare, but stay with me because this is important. The snakes of the Asclepius sanctuary were not random creatures. They were sacred animals, specifically bred and tamed for temple use. They were a species that modern scholars believe was probably the Asclepian snake, a non-venomous constrictor native to southern Europe. These snakes were gentle, accustomed to human presence. They'd been living in these temples for generations, and they served multiple purposes. First, symbolically. Snakes shed their skin, and to ancient people this was a powerful metaphor for renewal, for transformation, for healing. A snake that could slough off its old self and emerge fresh and new. What better symbol for what the pilgrims hoped would happen to them? But the snakes were not just symbolic. They were participants in the ritual. Some ancient accounts describe the snakes crawling over the sleeping pilgrims, licking their wounds or affected body parts with their tongues. Now, this might sound bizarre or even terrifying, but consider the psychological impact. You're in a trance-like state, hovering between waking and sleep. and you feel something cool and smooth moving across your skin. In the context of the temple, in the framework of belief that has been carefully constructed, you interpret this as the god's touch, as Asclepius himself in serpent form, examining you, healing you. Did the snakes actually have healing properties? Well, interestingly, modern science has discovered that snake saliva contains compounds with antimicrobial properties. Could this have contributed to the healing of certain conditions? Possibly, but more important than any physical effect was the psychological one. The presence of the snakes made the experience vivid, real, unforgettable. It gave pilgrims something tangible to hold on to, a physical memory of divine contact. Helena watches the snakes with a mixture of fear and wonder. One of them approaches her Klein, and she freezes, but Thea, still standing nearby, places a reassuring hand on Helena's shoulder. "Do not be afraid," she whispers. "They are the gods' messengers. Let them come." The snake moves closer, and Helena can see its tongue flicking out, tasting the air. And then it does something unexpected. It rests its head on the edge of her Klein, as if keeping watch, as if guarding her sleep. Thea begins to chant. It is not loud, not dramatic, just a low rhythmic murmur in a language Helena does not fully understand, perhaps an older form of Greek or words specific to the temple mysteries. Other priestesses are moving through the abaton now, stopping at each pilgrim's Klein, speaking their own quiet invocations. The effect is mesmerizing. The multiple voices, all chanting at slightly different rhythms, create a sound that seems to pulse and shift, that seems to come from inside Helena's own head rather than from outside. This technique has a name in modern terms. It is called auditory driving, and it is used in shamanic practices all over the world. When you hear repetitive sounds, drumming, chanting, rhythmic speech, at certain frequencies it can induce altered states of consciousness. It can trigger theta brainwaves, the same brainwaves associated with deep meditation and light sleep. The ancient priestesses did not know the neuroscience, but they knew the effect. They knew that if you chant in just the right way, with just the right rhythm, you can guide someone into a trance state, a space between waking and dreaming, where extraordinary experiences become possible. Helena's eyes grow heavy. The chanting, the dim light, the exhaustion from her journey, the hunger, the scent in the air, it is all combining now, all working together. She tries to stay awake, to remain aware, but it's like trying to hold water in her hands. Consciousness keeps slipping away, and then Thea leans close and speaks directly into her ear, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you sleep, Asclepius will come. He may appear as a man, a healer with kind eyes, or he may appear as something else, a light, a presence, a knowing that fills you. Trust what you see, trust what you feel, and when you wake, remember everything." And Helena does sleep. But it is not an ordinary sleep. Have you ever had one of those dreams where you know you're dreaming, where you're asleep but also somehow aware, observing yourself from a strange double perspective? That is what happens to Helena. She is aware of lying on the Klein, aware of the snake near her feet, aware of the sound of water and distant chanting, but she is also somewhere else. She is in a place that is both the abaton and not the abaton. The columns have become trees, the stone floor has become earth, and walking toward her through this strange hybrid landscape is a figure. He is tall, dressed in a simple tunic, carrying a staff around which a serpent is coiled. His face is difficult to see, as if light bends around it. But his eyes are clear and filled with something Helena can only describe as compassion. He does not speak with words, but she hears him anyway, hears his voice inside her mind. Where does it hurt? And Helena understands that he's not asking about her body. He is asking about something deeper. She opens her mouth to answer, but what comes out is not the complaint about physical pain she expected. Instead, she finds herself talking about her sister, who died in childbirth 5 years ago, about the guilt she carries, because she was not there, because she could not help, because she lived and her sister did not. She is crying now in the dream, and the figure, Asclepius, she knows it is him, reaches out and touches her chest right over her heart. His hand is warm, impossibly warm, and the warmth spreads through her like water seeping into dry ground. "This is the wound," he says. "Not in your back, not in your joints, here. The pain you carry in your body is the pain you carry in your soul. To heal one, you must heal the other." And then he shows her something, an image, a vision, her sister but not dead. Her sister in some other place, some realm of light and peace, holding the baby that did not survive, both of them whole and joyful. And her sister speaks, "I do not need your grief, beloved. I need your life. Live for both of us. Let me go." Helena wakes with a gasp. The Abaton is lighter now. Dawn is beginning to filter through the high windows. The snake is gone. The chanting has stopped, and she is weeping, but it is different from the crying she has done before. This is not the tight, painful grief she has carried for 5 years. This is something else. This is release. This is the kind of crying that cleans you out, that leaves you feeling emptied, but also, strangely, refilled with something lighter. Thea is there immediately, as if she has been waiting and watching all night. "Tell me," she says simply, and Helena does. She describes the dream in detail, the hybrid landscape, the figure of Asclepius, the conversation, the vision of her sister. Thea listens without interruption, nodding occasionally, her face serene and knowing. When Helena finishes, Thea is quiet for a long moment. Then she says, "The God has shown you the truth. Your pain is not in your body, it is in your heart, and he has given you permission to release it. This is your healing if you choose to accept it." Now we have to pause here and ask ourselves, what just happened? Did a god really visit Helena in her dream? Did Asclepius literally appear and speak to her? Or was this something else, her own unconscious mind working through trauma and grief under the carefully constructed conditions the priestesses had created? The answer, I think, depends on what you mean by real. The experience was real to Helena. The emotional release was real. The insight she gained that her physical pain was connected to unresolved grief was real and profound. Whether we attribute this to divine intervention or to the power of her own psyche working in an optimal environment for healing, does it matter? The healing happened. That is what matters. And this is what the inscriptions at Epidaurus record, not debates about the nature of reality, but the simple fact of healing. The stones that archaeologists uncovered in 1883, the Iamata, the testimonies of cures, they describe hundreds of cases like Helena's. Some are dramatic physical healings, blindness cured, paralysis reversed, tumours vanished. Some are more subtle, relief from chronic pain, restoration of hope, transformation of grief into peace. Let me share one of these actual inscriptions with you, translated from the ancient Greek. This one is about a woman named Arata from Sparta. Arata, a Spartan woman suffering from dropsy. On her behalf, her mother slept in the sanctuary while she remained in Sparta. It seemed to her that the god cut off her daughter's head and hung her body with the neck downwards. After a considerable amount of water had flowed out, he released the body and put the head back on her neck. After she saw this dream, she returned to Sparta and found her daughter healthy, and that she had seen the same dream. Think about that. The mother dreamed on behalf of her daughter who was not even present, and both of them saw the same dream. This is proxy dreaming, and it appears in multiple inscriptions. It suggests that the ancients believed the healing power of the sanctuary could work at a distance through the dreams of loved ones. Whether we believe this or not, it tells us something important about how they understood healing, as something that could transcend physical boundaries, that operated in a realm of connection and consciousness we barely acknowledge today. But not every dream at Epidaurus was symbolic or psychological. Some inscriptions describe very specific medical advice received in dreams. One account tells of a man with a stomach ailment who dreamed that Asclepius prescribed a particular diet of milk and honey and specific herbs. He followed the prescription and recovered. Another describes a woman who dreamed she should bathe in a particular spring at a particular time of day, and when she did, her skin condition cleared. Were these dreams actually divine prescriptions, or were they the unconscious mind drawing on the pilgrim's own observations and the medical knowledge they had absorbed from being in the sanctuary, from watching what the priests and priestesses did, from overhearing conversations about treatments? Again, does it matter? The dreams provided actionable guidance that led to healing. That is the remarkable thing. There is one more element of the sanctuary we have not yet explored, and it is perhaps the most mysterious: the tholos. This circular building, constructed between 365 and 335 BCE, was designed by the architect Polykleitos the Younger, and it was considered the most perfect circular building of its time. From the outside it was beautiful. 26 Doric columns forming the outer ring, Corinthian columns inside, intricate geometries, designs on the floor, painted scenes on the walls. But the real mystery was underground. Beneath the floor of the tholos, there was a labyrinth, a series of concentric circular passages carved into the rock, creating a maze that spiraled inward to a central chamber. Why? What was this labyrinth for? Scholars have debated this for over a century. Some believe it was where the sacred snakes were kept, that the inner chamber was the dwelling place of Asclepius in his serpent form. Others think it was used for secret initiation rituals, that advanced devotees or priestesses in training would descend into the darkness and undergo some kind of transformative experience in the bowels of the earth. We may never know for certain, because the rituals of the mystery cults were kept secret, and those secrets have been lost to time. But imagine it. Imagine being led down into that underground labyrinth into complete darkness, following the curved walls with your hands, not knowing how deep you are going or what you will find at the center. Imagine the fear, yes, but also the anticipation, the sense that you are descending into something primal, something that exists beneath the surface of ordinary life. It is easy to see how such an experience could be psychologically powerful, could shake loose old patterns of thinking, could open you to transformation. Helena does not go into the tholos. That is reserved for others, for reasons she does not fully understand. But she sees it as she leaves the Abaton in the morning, this mysterious circular building gleaming in the early sun, and she wonders what secrets it holds. She wonders who is allowed to enter and what they find when they do. Thea walks with her toward the entrance of the sanctuary. Helena feels different, lighter. The chronic pain in her back, the pain that has plagued her for years, is still there but somehow less insistent, as if it has been turned down like a lamp wick. She knows with a certainty she cannot explain that this pain will continue to fade in the days and weeks ahead. Not because of magic, but because she has finally understood its true source. Because she has been given permission to grieve and then to let go. Because something fundamental has shifted in how she holds herself, how she moves through the world. As they reach the gate, Thea places something in Helena's hand. A small clay votive offering in the shape of a body part, in this case a back. "Leave this at the temple," Thea says, "as a thank you to the god. and as a symbol that you are leaving your pain behind. Helena does as instructed, adding her small offering to the hundreds of others that line the walls of the sanctuary. Clay ears, eyes, legs, arms, hands, wombs, each one a prayer, each one a testament to the healing that happened here, night after night, dream after dream for over 1,000 years. And now we must ask ourselves, who were these women who guided pilgrims like Helena? What did they know that we have forgotten? What training did they undergo? What wisdom did they carry? What power did they wield in a world that was slowly, inexorably beginning to push women out of positions of spiritual and medical authority? In the next part of our journey, we are going to meet the priestesses of the dream temples. We are going to discover their training, their skills, their status in society. We are going to learn how they interpreted dreams, how they prescribed cures, how they maintained this sacred practice through generations, and we're going to understand why their role was not just important but essential, and why losing it cost us more than we know. Picture a woman named Callista. She is 14 years old and she stands at the entrance of the sanctuary at Epidaurus, but she is not a pilgrim seeking healing. She is here to begin her training as a hiereia, a priestess of Asclepius. Her family has prepared for this moment for years. They are not wealthy, but they are respected. Her grandmother was a priestess, and her mother before that. This knowledge runs in their blood, passed from woman to woman like a sacred inheritance. Callista is nervous, excited, terrified. She does not yet know that she is about to undergo one of the most rigorous educational programs in the ancient world. She does not yet know that when her training is complete, she will hold a position of power and authority that most men could only dream of. She does not yet know that she is stepping into a lineage of women who understood the human soul in ways that would not be matched again for thousands of years. Tonight, we are going to walk alongside Callista through her years of training. We are going to discover what it meant to be a priestess of the dream temples, what skills these women possessed, what wisdom they carried, and we are going to understand why their disappearance from history was not just a loss for women, but a loss for all of humanity. The training begins with silence. For the first year, Callista is not allowed to speak unless spoken to. She observes. She watches the older priestesses as they move through their daily routines, performing rituals at dawn, preparing the sanctuary for pilgrims, interpreting dreams in the morning, after enkoimesis, prescribing treatments, keeping records. She learns by watching, by absorbing, by allowing the rhythm of the sanctuary to become part of her own internal rhythm. This might sound harsh, but there is wisdom in it. In our modern world, we talk constantly. We fill every silence with noise, with opinions, with the sound of our own voices. But the ancient priestesses understood that to truly learn, you must first learn to be quiet, to listen, to observe without the filter of your own thoughts constantly chattering in your head. During this year of silence, Callista also begins her studies in literacy. Not all women in ancient Greece could read and write, but all priestesses had to. They needed to study sacred texts, to keep records of healings, to correspond with other sanctuaries. Callista learns to read Homer, to write in the elegant script used for temple inscriptions. She copies out hymns to Asclepius until her hand aches, until the words become part of her muscle memory. And she begins to study something else too, the human body. The priestesses had detailed anatomical knowledge, not from dissection like later physicians would practice, but from centuries of observation, from seeing thousands of bodies, healthy and sick, and noting the patterns. In her second year, Callista is allowed to speak, but only to ask questions, and she has many questions. She wants to know why some dreams are interpreted literally and others symbolically. She wants to know which herbs help with which ailments. She wants to know how you tell the difference between a divine visitation and an ordinary dream. Her teacher, an older priestess named Nikaya, who has served at the sanctuary for 40 years, answers patiently but often with questions of her own. What do you think? Nikaya asks. What does your intuition tell you? This is the heart of the training, not just memorizing facts, but developing the capacity to read situations, to sense what is beneath the surface, to trust the part of yourself that knows things you cannot rationally explain. Callista learns about plants. There is a garden at the sanctuary where medicinal herbs are grown, and she spends hours there, learning to identify each one by sight, by smell, by taste. She learns which plants induce sleep, which reduce pain, which calm anxiety, which promote healing of wounds. Some of this knowledge is recorded in texts, but much of it is oral tradition, passed directly from teacher to student. Nikaya shows her how to prepare a tea from valerian root that will help a pilgrim sleep deeply enough to dream. How to make a salve from honey and herbs that speeds the healing of skin lesions. How to recognize the difference between symptoms that will respond to herbal treatment and those that require something else. Something psychological, something spiritual. But the most important part of Callista's training has nothing to do with books or herbs. It is the training in dream interpretation. And this is an art, not science. There are guidebooks, yes, collections of dream symbols and their meanings. If you dream of a snake, it might mean healing or transformation. If you dream of water, it might mean emotions or purification. If you dream of a journey, it might mean a life transition. But Nikaya teaches Callista that these are just starting points. Every person's dream is unique, she says. Two people might dream of the same symbol, but it means something completely different for each of them. Your job is not to apply a formula. Your job is to listen, to feel, to understand the person in front of you well enough that you can sense what their soul is trying to tell them. How do you train someone to do that? How do you teach intuition? Nikaya's method is simple but profound. She has Callista sit with pilgrims after their enkoimesis, listening as they recount their dreams. But Callista is not allowed to speak or interpret, she just listens. And after the pilgrim leaves, Nikaya asks her, "What did you feel? What sensations arose in your body as they spoke? Where did your attention go?" Callista learns to notice her own responses. The tightness in her chest when someone is holding back grief, the warmth in her belly when someone is speaking a deep truth, the confusion in her mind when someone is telling themselves a story rather than the real story underneath. This is training in empathy, in embodied listening, in using your own nervous system as an instrument to read others. And it is incredibly sophisticated. Modern therapists spend years learning similar skills, and even then, not all of them develop this level of sensitivity. The ancient priestesses were doing this 2,000 years before psychology became a formal discipline. In her 4th year of training, Callista is finally allowed to begin interpreting dreams herself under supervision. A woman comes to the sanctuary, a merchant's wife from Corinth. She is perhaps 40 years old, well-dressed, but there is a tightness around her eyes, a weariness that speaks of long suffering. She sleeps in the abaton, and in the morning she comes to Callista and Nikaya. "I dreamed," she says, "that I was in my house, but all the walls were made of water. I could see through them to the street outside, and everyone was watching me. I tried to cover myself, but I had no clothes. And then a bird flew through one of the water walls and spoke to me, but I cannot remember what it said." Nikaya looks at Callista expectantly. This is a test. Callista takes a breath and asks the woman, "In the dream, when people were watching you, how did you feel?" The woman thinks. Ashamed, she says, but also angry. Because why should I have to hide? Why should I be the one who is ashamed? Callista nods slowly. And the bird, she asks. What kind of bird was it? The woman closes her eyes, trying to remember. A dove, she says, white, like the ones we sacrifice to Aphrodite. Callista glances at Nicaea, who gives her a small nod of encouragement. The god is showing you, Callista says carefully, that you feel exposed in your life, that you have no privacy, no protection. Your home, which should be a place of safety, has become a place where you feel watched and judged. The bird, the dove of Aphrodite, she is trying to tell you something about love, about your own worth, but you cannot hear her yet. The shame is too loud. The woman's eyes fill with tears. Yes, she whispers. Yes, that is it exactly. My husband's family lives with us. His mother, his sisters, they watch everything I do, criticize everything. I have no space of my own, no moment of peace. Nicaea places a hand on the woman's shoulder. Asclepius has shown you the truth of your suffering, she says. Now we must find the cure. Not a cure for your body. There is nothing wrong with your body, but a cure for your situation. You need boundaries. You need space. You need to reclaim your home as your own. She prescribes a ritual. The woman is to return home and create a room, even a small corner that is hers alone. She is to tell her husband's family that this space is sacred, that she will spend time there each day in prayer and meditation. The religious framing will make it harder for them to object, and she is to practice saying no. Simple, clear no. This is not medical advice in the way we think of it. This is life coaching, this is therapy. This is teaching a woman to set boundaries and reclaim her power, all framed within the acceptable language of religious duty. The ancient priestesses were doing feminist empowerment work 2,000 years before feminism had a name. Do you see how sophisticated this was? How psychologically astute? These women were not just performing rituals, they were skilled practitioners of what we now call psychotherapy, life coaching, pastoral counselling, all rolled into one, and they were respected for it, revered even. Let me tell you about the privileges that came with being a hieria, a priestess, in ancient Greece. These are documented facts, recorded in inscriptions and historical accounts. First, priestesses received a salary from the city. This was a public office, a recognized position within the civic structure. They were paid for their work, which meant they had economic independence, something most women in the ancient world did not have. Second, they received fees for the rituals they performed. When a pilgrim came for healing, when a family wanted a special ceremony, the priestess who conducted it was compensated. She also received a share of the sacrificial animals, the skins, the furs, certain cuts of meat. These were valuable commodities she could use or sell. Third, and this is the part that really amazes me, priestesses had reserved seats in the theatre. In the great theatres of Greece, where plays and festivals were performed, there were special seats in the front rows reserved for important civic officials, generals, politicians, judges, and priestesses. They sat alongside the most powerful men in society as equals. Can you imagine? In a culture where most women were expected to stay home, to have no public role, priestesses walked through the city with authority, with recognition, with honor. When a priestess died, she was often given a public funeral paid for by the city. Statues were erected in her honor, inscribed with her name and her accomplishments. These statues have been found at sanctuary sites all over Greece. They show women in positions of dignity and power, women whose contributions were considered worthy of permanent commemoration. This was not a minor role. This was not women being allowed to participate on the margins. This was women holding positions of genuine spiritual and social authority. But there is another dimension to this that we need to understand. Being a priestess was not just a job. It was an identity, a calling. The training was rigorous, yes, but it was also transformative. The women who underwent it were changed by it. They developed capacities, psychological, spiritual, intuitive, that set them apart. They became, in a very real sense, different from other women. Not better, but different. They had access to knowledge and experiences that most people never encountered. They had seen the depths of human suffering and the heights of human transformation. They had witnessed miracles, whether you define those miracles as divine intervention or as the extraordinary power of the human mind to heal itself. And they carried a burden too. Because to be the one who interprets dreams, who guides souls through their darkest nights, who holds the space for healing, that is exhausting work. Emotional labour on a profound scale. Nicaea tells Callista this in her final year of training. You will hear things, she says, that you cannot unhear. You will witness suffering you cannot fix. People will come to you desperate, and sometimes, no matter what you do, they will not be healed. You must learn to carry their hope without being destroyed by their despair, to care deeply without losing yourself in their pain. This is the training they do not put in the sacred texts. This is the preparation for burnout, for compassion fatigue, for the toll that healing work takes on the healer. And the sanctuary had structures in place to support its priestesses. They rotated duties so no one carried the full weight alone. They had their own rituals of purification and renewal. They had each other, a community of women doing this difficult work together, supporting each other, learning from each other. Callista's training takes 7 years. By the time she is 21, she is ready to take her vows, to become a full priestess. The ceremony is held at night, and it involves secrets she is forbidden to speak of to anyone who is not initiated. But when she emerges the next morning, she wears a special headband, a sign of her office. She carries the keys to the temple, literally, physical keys that mark her as the custodian of sacred space. And she knows things about the human heart, about dreams, about healing that most people will never know. She has become part of a lineage stretching back centuries, a lineage of women who held the mysteries of sleep and dreams and the healing power of the unconscious. Now, here is what breaks my heart. We know these women existed. We have the archaeological evidence, the inscriptions, the statues, the references in ancient texts. We know they were powerful, respected, essential to their communities. But we know almost nothing about them as individuals. We have their titles, their official roles, but not their stories, not their doubts or joys or the private thoughts they had as they walked through the sanctuary at dawn, not the conversations they had with each other, the wisdom they shared, the jokes they made. History has preserved the structure but not the soul, and then, of course, we know what happens. We know that this all ends, that by 393 CE, all priestess offices will be banned by imperial edict, that the temples will be closed, the practices forbidden, the women who carried this knowledge scattered or silenced or worse. We know that for the next 1,000 years and beyond, women who try to practice healing, who claim to have special knowledge of herbs or dreams or the invisible world, will be called witches and hunted and killed. But that is a later part of our story, and we are not there yet. Right now, Callista is 21 and newly ordained. She is standing in the Abaton, welcoming a new group of pilgrims, preparing to guide them through the rituals that she herself has now mastered. She does not know that she is living in what will later be seen as a golden age, a brief window in human history when women's spiritual authority was not just tolerated but celebrated. She does not know how rare and precious this is, how quickly it will be lost. But we know, and in the next part of our journey, we are going to explore what the pilgrims brought to these priestesses. What were the afflictions that sent women travelling for days to reach these sanctuaries? What were they hoping to heal? Because the ancient sleep temples were not addressing random medical complaints. There were patterns. Certain types of suffering that seemed to affect women more than men. Certain wounds that the priestesses saw again and again. And when we look at those patterns, when we understand what ancient women were seeking healing for, we might recognize something. We might see ourselves reflected in those 2,000-year-old inscriptions. We might realize that some forms of pain, some forms of suffering, some forms of being broken by the world, these things have not changed as much as we might think. There is a stone tablet in the archaeological museum at Epidaurus, worn smooth by time but still legible. It records the story of a woman named Andromache from Epirus, who came to the sanctuary seeking something that no physician could give her, not a cure for illness, not relief from pain, but a child. She was desperate for offspring, and after years of years of disappointment, years of watching her belly remain flat while other women in her community grew round with new life, she came to the sleep temple, she underwent the rituals, she slept in the abaton, and in her dream she saw a beautiful boy who lifted her dress and touched her belly. When she woke, she knew. Within months, she was pregnant. The inscription tells us that she and her husband, Serapis, returned to Epidaurus with their baby to give thanks to the god. This stone has been sitting in that museum for over 2,000 years, a testament to one woman's longing, one woman's healing, one woman's joy. But Andromache was not unique. When archaeologists studied the inscriptions at Epidaurus and other Asclepius sanctuaries, when they catalogued the hundreds of healing testimonies that survived, they found patterns. And the most striking pattern was this: women came to the sleep temples for very specific afflictions, issues that were uniquely female, or issues that seemed to affect women far more severely than men. Tonight, we are going to explore what ancient women were suffering from, what they were seeking to heal, and I think you will find, as I did, that their pain echoes across the centuries, that the wounds they carried are wounds we still carry today. Let us start with the most common complaint: infertility. In the ancient world, a woman's value was often measured by her ability to produce children, particularly sons. A woman who could not conceive was not just facing personal heartbreak, she was facing social stigma, potential abandonment by her husband, economic insecurity, and a life of being seen as incomplete, as failed, as cursed by the gods. The pressure was immense, and the pain was compounded by the fact that in most cases, the woman was blamed, even when the problem might have been with the man. Even when there were physiological issues beyond anyone's control, it was the woman who bore the shame. So they came to Epidaurus. They came to other sanctuaries. They slept and they dreamed and they prayed for the god to open their wombs. And some of them, like Andromache, conceived. Now we can debate the mechanism. Was it divine intervention? Or was it that the stress reduction, the psychological release, the deep rest, the sense of being held and supported, was it that these things created the physiological conditions necessary for conception? We know now that stress can interfere with fertility, that anxiety can disrupt hormonal cycles, that the mind and body are connected in ways that affect reproduction. Perhaps what the sleep temples provided was not magic, but something equally powerful: permission to let go of the desperate striving, to rest, to trust, to soften into hope instead of hardening in despair. But infertility was not the only reproductive issue that brought women to the sanctuaries. There were women who had lost multiple pregnancies, who had buried baby after baby and were terrified to try again. There were women who had survived traumatic births, who carried physical injuries or psychological scars from the experience. There were women whose babies had died in infancy, who were drowning in grief that had nowhere to go because they were expected to simply try again, to produce another child as if the lost one had never existed. Let me read you another inscription, this one from the 4th century BCE. It is about a woman whose name has been partially worn away, but we know she came from Thessaly. A woman came to the sanctuary unable to speak of her grief. Her child had died in her arms, and since that day no words would come from her mouth. She could scream, but she could not form words. She slept in the abaton and dreamed that the god touched her throat and drew out a black stone. When she woke, she could speak again. The first words she said were her child's name. The grief had literally stolen her voice. And what healed her was not forgetting, not moving on, not being told to be strong. What healed her was being allowed to name her loss, to speak it aloud in a sacred space where it would be witnessed and honored. This is trauma therapy. This is what we now call somatic healing, addressing the way trauma gets stored in the body, the way it manifests as physical symptoms that have psychological roots. The ancient priestesses were doing this work millennia before we had the language to describe it. Women also came for what the inscriptions vaguely call female troubles, or afflictions of the womb. We can only guess at the specifics: painful menstruation, prolapsed uterus, infections, cysts, tumours, conditions that were embarrassing to discuss, that male physicians would not examine or treat, that left women suffering in sense. The sleep temples offered something radical, a space where female bodies were not shameful, where women could speak about their physical experiences to other women who would understand, who would not be disgusted or dismissive. One inscription describes a woman who had been bleeding continuously for years. Think about that. Years of hemorrhaging, of weakness, of anemia, of having to manage the physical reality of constant blood loss in a world without modern hygiene products. She came to Epidaurus so desperate that she could barely walk. She slept, and in her dream, the god performed surgery on her, cutting away the source of the bleeding. When she woke, the bleeding had stopped. Can we explain this medically? Perhaps it was psychosomatic. Perhaps the bleeding had a stress-related component that resolved when she finally felt safe and cared for. Or perhaps, and this is more speculative, perhaps the deep rest, the ritual, the belief, triggered some kind of physiological reset. We know that the mind can affect the body in profound ways. Placebos can reduce measurable symptoms. Hypnosis can control bleeding and pain. The mechanisms are not fully understood, even now, but the effects are real. But not all the afflictions that brought women to the sleep temples were physical. Many were what we would now recognize as mental health issues: depression, anxiety, what the ancients called melancholia or hysteria, terms that carried judgment and misunderstanding just as mental health diagnoses often still do today. Women came because they could not stop crying, because they could not get out of bed, because they were plagued by fears that seemed irrational but felt overwhelming, because they no longer wanted to live. And here is what strikes me as I read these accounts. The priestesses took these women seriously. They did not dismiss their suffering as weakness or exaggeration. They did not tell them to simply try harder, to pray more, to think positive thoughts. They recognized that psychological pain is real pain, that it requires real treatment. They created space for these women to rest, to dream, to process whatever trauma or sorrow or terror was consuming them, and often that space alone, that validation, that witness, that sacred container was enough to begin the healing process. There is an inscription about a woman named Euphemia from Corinth who came to the sanctuary because she was, as the stone says, troubled by dark visions and unable to find joy in anything. We might call this depression with intrusive thoughts. She slept in the abaton for 3 consecutive nights. On the 3rd night she dreamed that she was drowning in a dark sea, and just as she was about to go under, a hand reached down and pulled her out. The hand belonged to Asclepius, and he said to her, "You're not meant to drown, you are meant to swim." When she woke, she said she felt as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. She could breathe again. The dark visions did not disappear immediately, but they lost their power over her. She had been given a new story to tell herself, not "I am drowning, but I'm learning to swim." This is cognitive reframing. This is narrative therapy. This is the power of metaphor to shift perspective, to offer hope without denying the reality of struggle. And it came to her in a dream, facilitated by priestesses who understood that sometimes what we need is not a solution, but a new way of understanding our situation. Women also came to the sleep temples for chronic pain, back pain, joint pain, headaches that would not relent. And here is what is so interesting. When archaeologists analysed these cases, they found that often the pain had no clear physical cause, or the physical cause was minor, a small injury that should have healed, but instead became a source of persistent, debilitating discomfort. What we now call chronic pain syndrome, what we now understand as pain that has psychological and neurological components, pain that is real but not purely structural. The priestesses seemed to understand this intuitively. They did not just prescribe herbs or recommend rest. They asked questions, they listened to dreams, they looked for the emotional wounds beneath the physical symptoms. Remember Helena from the beginning of our story? Her chronic back pain that was really unresolved grief? That was not an isolated case. That pattern shows up again and again in the inscriptions. A woman in pain who discovers, through the process of enkoimesis, that her body is holding something her mind has not been able to process. And when she finally processes it, when she finally releases it, the physical pain eases. Now I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that all pain is psychological, or that women who are suffering just need to think better thoughts. That is reductive and harmful. What I am saying is that the ancient priestesses understood something we have largely forgotten, that physical and psychological health are not separate, that trauma can manifest as physical symptoms, that the body keeps the score, as the modern saying goes, that to truly heal, we often need to address both the body and the soul simultaneously. Let me tell you about one more category of suffering that brought women to the temples, and this one might surprise you. Isolation, loneliness. The inscriptions describe women who were alone in their hearts, even when surrounded by family. Women who felt unseen, unheard, disconnected from everyone around them. This was not considered a medical condition in the ancient world. There was no diagnosis for loneliness, but the priestesses recognized it as a form of suffering that required healing. What did they prescribe for these women? Often they encouraged them to stay at the sanctuary for an extended period, to participate in the communal meals, the festivals, the rituals, to form connections with other pilgrims, other women who had travelled far seeking healing. The sanctuary became, in effect, a temporary community, a place where women who felt isolated and in their ordinary lives could experience belonging, sisterhood, shared purpose. There is an inscription about a widow named Melita, who came to Epidaurus not because she was sick, but because, as she said, "I have forgotten what it is to be seen." Her children had grown and left. Her husband was dead. She lived in her son's household but felt like a ghost, invisible, irrelevant. She spent a month at the sanctuary. She did not have dramatic healing dreams, but she made friends, she learned songs, she helped in the kitchen, She listened to other women's stories and shared her own, and when she left, she said she felt alive again. She felt like a person, not just a burden. This is community as medicine. This is relationship as healing, and it is something that women in particular seem to need and respond to. We are social creatures, wired for connection, and when that connection is severed by death, by circumstance, by the structures of society that isolate us, we suffer. The sleep temples understood this. They created not just individual healing experiences, but communal ones. They wove women into a web of support that could hold them, even when their personal lives felt empty. So what have we learned from looking at what ancient women came to heal? We have learned that their pain was not so different from our pain. They struggled with their bodies, with their reproductive lives, with trauma and grief and mental health and chronic conditions that defied easy explanation. They felt pressure to perform femininity in specific ways, to be wives, mothers, caregivers, and when they could not fulfill those roles, they suffered not just personally but socially. They experienced loneliness and isolation even in the midst of families and communities. They carried wounds in their bodies that were really wounds in their souls. And they found in the sleep temples something they could not find anywhere else. They found women who listened, women who understood, women who held space for their suffering without judgment or dismissal, women who said, "Yes, this is real. Yes, this matters. Yes, you deserve healing." They found rituals that honored their pain, dreams that offered new perspectives, communities that witnessed their struggles and celebrated their recoveries. Does any of this sound familiar? Do you recognize yourself in these ancient inscriptions, the woman struggling with fertility, with health issues that doctors cannot quite explain, with grief that has no outlet, with loneliness that feels like a physical ache? She is not just 2,000 years in the past. She is here. She is now. She might be you, and that is why this story matters, because what these ancient women knew, what the priestesses understood, is something we desperately need to remember. That healing is not just about fixing what is broken, it is about creating wholeness. It is about addressing the seen and the unseen, the body and the spirit, the individual and the community. It is about having spaces where women can bring their full, messy, complicated selves and be met with wisdom and compassion instead of judgment and quick fixes. In the next part of our journey, we are going to dive deep into the science. We are going to ask the hard questions. Did this actually work? What does modern medicine say about the techniques used in sleep temples? Can we explain the healings through neuroscience, psychology, placebo effects? Or is there something more, something that science has not yet fully grasped? We are going to bridge the ancient and the modern, the mystical and the empirical, because understanding why the sleep temples worked is the key to reclaiming their wisdom for ourselves. Let us imagine that we could bring one of those ancient priestesses, perhaps Nicaea who trained Callista, forward through time and sit her down with a modern neuroscientist. What would happen? Would the scientist dismiss everything she did as superstition and placebo? Or would they find as they talked that they were actually describing the same phenomena, just using different language? I think the conversation would be fascinating, because the more we understand about how the human brain works, how consciousness functions, how the body heals itself, the more we realize that the ancient practitioners were not working with fantasy. They were working with real, powerful mechanisms that modern science is only now beginning to fully comprehend. Tonight, we are going to do something that might seem impossible. We are going to take the practices of the sleep temples, practices that look mystical, religious, inexplicable, and we are going to examine them through the lens of contemporary science, not to reduce them, not to strip away their mystery, but to understand why they worked. Because they did work. The thousands of testimonies, the centuries of operation, the fact that people travelled hundreds of miles and spent their life savings to come to these places, that is evidence. Real people experienced real healing. And the question is not, was it magic? The question is, what were the mechanisms? Let us start with sleep itself, because that is the foundation of everything that happened in these temples. Why did the ancient practitioners put so much emphasis on sacred sleep? What did they understand about sleep that made it central to their healing practice? Modern sleep science has given us answers that would have thrilled those ancient priestesses. We now know that sleep is not just rest. It is not the brain shutting down for the night. It is actually a highly active process during which the brain does some of its most important work. During sleep, especially during deep sleep, your brain clears out toxins that have accumulated during the day. There is literally a cleaning system called the glymphatic system that activates when you sleep, flushing out cellular waste products that, if left to build up, can contribute to everything from brain fog to neurodegenerative diseases. The ancient priestesses did not know about the glymphatic system, but they knew that people who slept deeply in the sanctuary often woke feeling clearer, lighter, as if something heavy had been washed away. They were right. During sleep, your body also repairs itself at the cellular level. Growth hormone is released, damaged tissues are rebuilt, your immune system strengthens, inflammation decreases. This is why sleep deprivation makes you sick, makes you age faster, makes every health condition you have worse. And this is why the sleep temples, by creating optimal conditions for deep restorative sleep, were able to facilitate genuine physical healing. Not through magic, but through allowing the body to do what it does naturally when given the right environment. But there is more. During REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs, something extraordinary happens in your brain. Your emotional processing centers become highly active while your logical, rational centers quiet down. This allows you to process experiences, particularly traumatic or emotionally charged experiences, in a way that you cannot do when awake. You essentially rehearse different scenarios, integrate memories, work through fears and anxieties. Dreams are your brain's way of making sense of your life, of filing away experiences, of healing psychological wounds. Research has shown that people who are deprived of REM sleep have more difficulty processing emotions, more anxiety, more depression. They cannot integrate their experiences properly. They get stuck. And here is what is remarkable. The sleep temples were designed to maximize not just sleep, but specifically the kind of deep dream-rich sleep that allows this processing to happen. The fasting, the exhaustion from the journey, the sensory environment of the Abaddon with its dim lights and soothing sounds, all of this was optimizing brain states for therapeutic dreaming. There is a researcher at Harvard Medical School named Deirdre Barrett who has studied what she calls dream incubation. She teaches people techniques to have specific dreams that can help them solve problems, process trauma, gain creative insights. And her methods are strikingly similar to what the ancient priestesses did. Set a clear intention before sleep. Create a calm, focused mental state. Use visualization and suggestion. And then trust that the dreaming mind will do its work. Her studies show that this actually works. People can influence their dreams, and those dreams can provide real therapeutic benefit, real insights, real solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable during waking hours. So when Helena dreamed of Asclepius telling her that her physical pain was rooted in unresolved grief, was that a god speaking to her? Or was that her own unconscious mind freed by the dream state to communicate what her conscious mind could not accept? Does it matter? Either way, the insight was real. The healing was real. Now let us talk about the placebo effect, because this is where things get really interesting. For a long time, medicine treated the placebo effect as a nuisance, as a confounding variable to be controlled for in studies. If a patient improved after taking a sugar pill, that was considered not real healing. But in the last few decades, scientists have realized that the placebo effect is real healing. It is not imaginary. It produces measurable physiological changes. When you believe you are being treated, when you expect to get better, your brain releases endorphins and other neurochemicals that reduce pain. It modulates your immune system. It affects inflammation markers in your blood. It can even influence how quickly wounds heal. The placebo effect can be 30 to 40% as effective as actual medication for certain conditions. And here is the key. The strength of the placebo effect is directly related to the strength of the belief, the ritual, the context around the treatment. The sleep temples were placebo effect maximizers. Everything about them was designed to create belief, expectation, hope. The journey itself, the purification rituals, the stories of miraculous cures, the theatre performances, the sacred architecture, the presence of the snakes, the authority of the priestesses, all of it was building a framework of meaning that said, healing is possible, it happens here, it will happen to you. And that framework activated the body's own healing mechanisms in powerful ways. But calling it just placebo diminishes what was actually happening. Because the placebo effect is not fake healing. It is self-healing. It is your own mind and body doing the work, triggered by belief and expectation and context. The ancient priestesses understood this intuitively. They knew that their job was not to heal people directly, but to create the conditions, physical, psychological, spiritual, where people could heal themselves. There is another mechanism at work in the sleep temples that modern psychology has given a name: hypnotic suggestion. When you are in a trance state, drowsy, relaxed, focused inward, you become highly suggestible. Your critical, analytical mind quiets down and your unconscious mind becomes more receptive to new ideas, new patterns, new ways of being. This is the basis of clinical hypnotherapy, which is now used for pain management, anxiety, irritable bowel syndrome, and many other conditions. The priestesses were inducing trance states through multiple methods. The chanting, the dim lighting, the rhythmic sounds of water, the exhaustion and hunger, these all contribute to altered consciousness. And in that altered state, the suggestions they offered, the God will heal you, you will have prophetic dreams, your pain will leave you. These suggestions bypassed the rational mind and went directly into the unconscious, where they could actually influence physiology. There have been studies showing that hypnotic suggestion can control bleeding, can reduce the need for anesthesia during surgery, can accelerate wound healing. This is not mysticism. This is measurable, replicable science, and it is exactly what was happening in the sleep temples 2,000 years ago. But there is something else, something that science is only beginning to understand. It has to do with the nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system that controls your stress response. When you are chronically stressed, your body stays in fight or flight mode. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated constantly. This leads to inflammation, pain, digestive problems, immune dysfunction, all manner of illness. To heal, you need to shift into the parasympathetic mode, rest and digest, the state where healing and regeneration happen. The entire structure of the sleep temple experience was designed to shift people out of sympathetic arousal and into parasympathetic restoration. The journey to the sanctuary removed you from your stressful daily life. The purification rituals signaled to your nervous system that you were entering a safe space. The fasting, the baths, the music, the sense of being cared for by wise women who understood your suffering, all of this was telling your body, you can relax now, you can let go, you are safe. And when your nervous system finally shifts into that parasympathetic state, when you finally feel safe enough to truly rest, healing cascades through your system. Pain decreases because your pain threshold increases, inflammation reduces, digestion improves, sleep deepens. This is called neuroception in modern terms, your nervous system's unconscious assessment of safety or danger. The sleep temples were creating environments of profound safety, and that safety was itself therapeutic. There is a therapy modality now called polyvagal theory-informed therapy that works with exactly this principle. It teaches people to regulate their nervous systems, to shift from states of stress and shutdown into states of social engagement and restoration. And the techniques used, rhythmic breathing, safe physical environments, trusted relationships, ritual and routine, these are remarkably similar to what the ancient priestesses practiced. Let us talk about community and social support, because this too has a biological basis. When you feel isolated, when you feel unseen and unheard, your body registers this as a threat. Loneliness actually increases inflammation, suppresses immune function, increases stress hormones. It is as dangerous to your health as smoking. But when you feel connected, when you are part of a supportive community, the opposite happens. Your stress levels drop, your immune function improves, you release oxytocin, the bonding hormone that reduces anxiety and promotes healing. The sleep temples were creating temporary communities of healing. Women who might have been isolated in their home lives suddenly found themselves surrounded by other women going through similar struggles. They shared meals, they shared stories, they witnessed each other's suffering and celebrated each other's healings. This was social support as medicine, and modern science confirms that it works. Study after study shows that people with strong social connections heal faster from illness, recover better from surgery, live longer, have better mental health. The priestesses knew this. They built it into their practice. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, okay, but what about the really dramatic healings? What about the blind person who could see, the paralyzed person who walked? Can science explain those? Here is the thing. We know that some cases of blindness are psychological, not physical. We know that some cases of paralysis have no structural cause. They are what we call conversion disorders, where psychological trauma manifests as physical disability. And we know that these conditions can sometimes be reversed through psychological interventions, through deep shifts in consciousness and belief. It is rare, but it happens. Spontaneous remissions from chronic conditions, sudden reversals of symptoms that seemed permanent. These things occur even in modern medicine, even in cases where we cannot fully explain the mechanism. Were all the healings at Epidaurus explainable through psychology and neuroscience? Probably not. Some were likely exaggerated. Some might have been temporary improvements that relapsed later. But some were probably genuine, inexplicable, what we might call miraculous if we are comfortable with that word, or simply not yet understood by science if we are not. The honest answer is that we still do not fully understand how the mind affects the body. We are discovering new mechanisms constantly. Epigenetics has shown us that experiences and beliefs can literally turn genes on and off. Psychoneuroimmunology has shown us that thoughts and emotions directly influence immune function. The field of mind-body medicine is revealing connections we never suspected. So when an ancient woman had a healing dream and woke cured of a condition that had plagued her for years, was it impossible? Or was it that her mind, given the right conditions, accessed healing capacities we do not yet fully comprehend? I think the ancient priestesses would say, stop asking how it is possible, and start asking how we can create the conditions for it to happen, because that is what they did. They did not have scientific instruments or controlled studies, but they had centuries of observation, of trial and error, of noting what worked and refining their techniques. They had accumulated wisdom about how to facilitate healing, and that wisdom was remarkably effective. And here is what moves me most. They were doing all of this with women's bodies, women's pain, women's suffering as their primary focus. At a time when male physicians often ignored or dismissed women's health concerns, when female bodies were considered mysterious and problematic, the priestesses said, "No, we understand, we know this territory, we can help." And they developed sophisticated techniques specifically for the kinds of suffering women experienced most acutely. Modern medicine is only now beginning to catch up to what they knew. We are only now acknowledging that women's pain is often undertreated, that women's health concerns are often dismissed, that the mind-body connection is particularly pronounced in conditions that disproportionately affect women. We are only now developing trauma-informed care, somatic therapies, integrative approaches that address the whole person. We are rediscovering slowly and painfully what the sleep temple priestesses practiced as matter of course. So here is what I want you to take from this. The sleep temples worked not because of supernatural intervention, though we cannot rule that out entirely, and not just because of placebo effects, though those were certainly part of it. They worked because the priestesses had developed a sophisticated, multi-layered system that addressed healing on every level: physical, psychological, social, spiritual. They used techniques that we now understand through neuroscience, psychology, immunology, and fields we have not even named yet. They were empirical practitioners, observing what worked and doing more of it, even if they explained the mechanisms differently than we would. The tragedy is not that we lost the gods. The tragedy is that we lost the practices, the wisdom, the understanding of how to create the conditions for healing. We lost the women who held that knowledge. We lost the spaces where that kind of deep, holistic healing could occur, and we are still paying the price for that loss, especially women who often find themselves suffering in systems that do not see them, do not hear them, do not understand that their pain is complex and requires more than quick fixes and prescription pads. But the story is not over, because in the next part of our journey, we are going to explore what happened to the sleep temples. How did this practice that worked for thousands of years, that served millions of people, that was central to ancient healthcare, how did it end? What forces conspired to close the temples, to ban the priestesses, to erase this tradition from history? And why is understanding that loss essential to reclaiming what was taken from us? The year is 87 BCE, and something terrible is about to happen at Epidaurus. A Roman general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla is marching through Greece, and he needs money. He needs it desperately because he's fighting a civil war back in Rome, and wars are expensive. So he does what conquering armies have always done: he plunders. He goes to the richest, most vulnerable targets he can find. And temples, with their accumulated offerings of gold and silver and precious objects, temples are very rich indeed. When Sulla's soldiers arrive at the sanctuary of Asclepius, the priestesses know what is coming. They have heard the stories from other sanctuaries that have already been looted. They gather the most sacred objects, the ancient texts, the healing records inscribed on stone, the statue of Asclepius himself, and they try to hide them. But you cannot hide everything. You cannot hide the gold that covers the temple roof, the bronze doors, the countless votive offerings that line the walls. The soldiers take it all. They strip the sanctuary bare. And what they cannot carry, they destroy. Not out of malice necessarily, just out of the casual brutality of men who've been taught that conquered peoples and their gods do not matter. When Sulla's army leaves, the sanctuary at Epidaurus is a shell. The buildings still stand, but the heart has been ripped out. The priestesses remain, but they have no resources, no gold to maintain the buildings, no funds to pay for the complex water systems that supplied the baths and fountains, no means to host the elaborate festivals that drew pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. This is the beginning of the end, though it will take centuries to fully play out. Tonight, we are going to trace that ending. We are going to watch as the sleep temples, which had served humanity for over 4,000 years, slowly crumbled and fell silent. And we are going to ask the hard question, why? What forces, what ideas, what shifts in power conspired to destroy this practice? And what was lost when it disappeared? After Sulla, there is a brief period of hope. The sanctuary struggles on. Pilgrims still come, though fewer than before. The priestesses adapt, make do with less. And then, in 74 BCE, another blow. A Roman commander named Marcus Antonius Creticus installs a military garrison in the city of Epidaurus. Soldiers everywhere. They consume resources. They disrupt the sacred atmosphere that the sanctuary depends on. Grain becomes scarce. The region suffers. And then, in 67 BCE, pirates raid the coast. They loot what Sulla missed. They burn buildings. They carry off treasures and probably people too, sold into slavery. Archaeological evidence shows extensive damage during this period. The guest house, which had accommodated hundreds of pilgrims, is abandoned. The gymnasium, where pilgrims exercised as part of their healing regimen, falls into disrepair. The sophisticated water supply system, which had required constant maintenance, breaks down and is not fixed. Most devastating of all, the sanctuary of Apollo Meleatus up on the mountain, the ancient heart from which the whole tradition grew, the place where goddess worship had transformed into god worship centuries before. That sanctuary is destroyed and never rebuilt. Can you imagine what this must have felt like for the priestesses? Watching a tradition that stretched back millennia, watching knowledge that had been carefully preserved and passed down from woman to woman, watching all of it crumble because men with swords needed gold to pay for their wars, because that is what happened. The sleep temples did not fall because they stopped working. They did not fall because people stopped believing in them. They fell because of violence, because of greed, because the healing of ordinary people was less important than the ambitions of powerful men. But the story does not end there, because something remarkable happens. The sanctuary at Epidaurus, battered and broken, somehow survives. In the 2nd century CE, over 200 years after Sulla's raid, there is a revival. A wealthy Roman benefactor, a man named Antoninus Pius, falls in love with Greek culture and decides to fund the restoration of several important sanctuaries. Epidaurus is one of them. Money pours in, buildings are renovated, new structures are built, including a house specifically for pregnant women and dying people. Because remember, births and deaths were not allowed within the sacred precinct, and this had always posed a logistical challenge. The sanctuary flourishes again. Pilgrims return in great numbers. The famous Greek traveller Pausanias visits in the 2nd century CE and writes detailed descriptions of what he sees: the temples, the theatre, the sacred grove, the statue of Asclepius. His account is one of our most important sources for understanding what the sanctuary looked like at its height. And for a brief shining moment, it seems like the sleep temples might endure forever. Like this practice might continue, might evolve, might integrate with the new ideas and new religions that are spreading through the Roman world. But there is something else spreading through the Roman world. A religion that started in Palestine, among a small group of followers of a Jewish preacher named Jesus. Christianity. And Christianity has some very specific ideas about healing, about miracles, about who has the authority to mediate between humans and the divine. And those ideas are not compatible with priestesses interpreting dreams in pagan temples. At first, the conflict is not obvious. Early Christians actually adopt some practices from the healing cults. The idea of incubation, of sleeping in a sacred space and receiving divine visions that gets transferred to Christian saints and martyrs. There are stories of people sleeping at the tombs of saints and being healed through dreams. The Emperor Constantine himself, before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, supposedly has a dream the night before that leads to his conversion and his victory. Dreams and visions remain important in Christian tradition. But here is the crucial difference. In Christianity, these experiences are supposed to come directly from God, mediated perhaps by Jesus or the saints, but not by human intermediaries, and certainly not by women. The early church fathers are very clear on this point. Women are not to teach, not to have authority over men, not to hold positions of spiritual leadership, 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 12. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be stiglent. This becomes church law. This becomes the foundation of Christian patriarchy for the next 2,000 years. So what happens to the priestesses? At first, nothing official. Christianity is still a minority religion. The old temples continue to operate, but the pressure builds. Christian preachers denounce the pagan sanctuaries as houses of demons. They say the healings that happen there are not from gods but from evil spirits. They say the priestesses are witches, servants of Satan. And slowly the culture shifts. Fewer people come to the sanctuaries. Those who do come are sometimes harassed, sometimes attacked by the zealous Christians who see themselves as doing God's work. And then comes the hammer blow. In 393 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I issues an edict. All pagan temples are to be closed. All pagan practices are banned. Any priest or priestess who continues to perform the old rituals can be punished, even executed. This is not just about Asclepius. This is about Jupiter and Venus and Artemis and all the gods of the old world. But it includes, specifically and explicitly, the healing sanctuaries. And it includes a provision that should make your blood run cold. All priestess offices are permanently abolished. Let me say that again. All priestess offices are permanently abolished. Women are forbidden, by imperial law backed by the full might of the Roman Empire and the authority of the Christian Church, from holding positions of spiritual leadership. 4,000 years of tradition erased by a single decree. Thousands of women who had dedicated their lives to healing, to dream interpretation, to serving their communities, they are suddenly criminals if they continue their work. What happened to them? We do not know for the most part. History does not record the fates of the individual priestesses. We do not have their stories, their final words, their grief and rage as they watched their temples desecrated, their sacred objects smashed, their life's work declared evil. Some probably converted to Christianity, found ways to continue some form of healing work within the new system, though in diminished roles, always subject to male authority. Some probably retreated into hiding, practiced their arts in secret, passed what knowledge they could to daughters and granddaughters in whispers and shadows, and some, we can assume, resisted, and paid the price for resistance. Because here is what happens next. Over the following centuries, as Christianity consolidates its power, any woman who claims special knowledge of herbs, of healing, of dreams, of the invisible world, any woman who seems to have power that does not come from male priests or male church authority, she becomes suspect, she becomes dangerous, and eventually she becomes a witch. The European witch hunts, which will rage from the 15th to the 18th centuries, which will kill hundreds of thousands of women, many of them healers and midwives. Those hunts have their roots here, in the destruction of the priestess traditions, in the terror of female spiritual authority that Christianity enshrined into law. The sanctuary at Epidaurus itself struggles on for a while. Some archaeological evidence suggests activity continuing into the 5th century CE, though at a much reduced scale. But eventually it falls silent. The last pilgrims come and find the gates locked, the buildings empty, the priestesses gone. Nature begins to reclaim the stone, grass grows between the columns. The theatre, that perfect acoustic marvel, sits empty for over 1,000 years until it is rediscovered by archaeologists in the 19th century. And the knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of dream interpretation, of psychological healing, of the mind-body connection, of trauma therapy through sacred sleep. Most of it is lost. Some fragments survive in medical texts. Hippocrates and Galen, the famous Greek physicians, they had learned from the temple traditions even as they were trying to establish medicine as a more rational, less religious practice. Some techniques get absorbed into Christian monasticism, the use of fasting, a ritual of meditation to alter consciousness. Some wisdom goes underground, preserved by women healers who risk their lives to practice in secret. But the integrated system, the holistic approach, the recognition that women's healing requires women's wisdom, the understanding that psychological and physical health are inseparable, the practice of creating sacred community and sacred sleep as pathways to healing, all of that is shattered, and we lose it for over 1,500 years. Think about what this means. Think about the women who suffered during those 1,500 years with conditions that the priestesses could have helped. Women in chronic pain, women unable to conceive, women drowning in grief or terror or depression, women whose bodies were carrying trauma they could not name, they had nowhere to go. Male physicians who did not understand female bodies, who often refused to even examine them. Male priests who told them their suffering was punishment for sin, who offered prayer but not understanding. A medical system that saw physical symptoms but not psychological roots. A religious system that saw the soul but not the body. No one who could see the whole person, the integrated self, the complex reality of being a woman in pain. The loss was staggering, and we are still living with its consequences. But here is something that gives me a complicated kind of hope, bitter and sweet at the same time. The knowledge was not entirely lost. It could not be because it was not just written in books. It was written in women's bodies, in women's intuition, in the deep knowing that gets passed down even when the official traditions are destroyed. Women continued to heal each other in the shadows, in the margins, in the spaces that patriarchy did not fully control. Midwives attending births, herb women brewing their teas, grandmothers whispering remedies, wise women listening to dreams and offering interpretations. They were called witches, called dangerous, called evil, but they persisted. And some of the knowledge survived in unexpected places, in folk traditions, in fairy tales where the old woman in the forest has magic and wisdom, in prayers to female saints who took on some of the attributes of the old goddesses, in the persistent belief, despite all attempts to suppress it, that women understand mysteries that men do not, that there is power in the feminine, in the dark, in the dreaming, in the underground places where life begins and transformation happens. The sleep temples fell. The priestesses were silenced, but the need they served, the suffering they addressed, the healing they facilitated, that never went away. That need has been with us all along, unmet, aching, waiting for someone to remember, to reclaim, to rebuild what was destroyed. And that brings us to now, to the moment we are living in where women are starting to ask questions, where we are looking back through history and noticing what was erased, where we are recognizing patterns of suppression and control, where we are feeling in our bodies and our dreams and our intuition that something essential was taken from us and we want it back. In the next part of our journey, we are going to explore what remains. What traces of the sleep temple tradition survived into the modern world? where can we still find echoes of this practice? What modern therapies and techniques are rediscovering what the ancient priestesses knew? And how can we in our own lives begin to reclaim this lost art of healing through sacred sleep and dreams? Something unexpected happened in Vienna in 1778. A physician named Franz Anton Mesmer was treating patients using what he called animal magnetism, a force he believed flowed through all living things and could be manipulated to cure disease. His methods were strange by the standards of the time. He would have patients lie down in a dimly lit room. He would play soft music. He would make passes with his hands over their bodies, inducing a trance-like state. And people were getting better, but enough that Mesmer became famous, sought after, controversial. The medical establishment denounced him as a charlatan, but patients kept coming, kept reporting healings, kept describing experiences that sounded remarkably like what we've been talking about. Altered consciousness, vivid dreams, psychological insights, physical symptoms that disappeared after emotional breakthroughs. Mesmer did not know it, but he was rediscovering something ancient. He was stumbling through his own experimentation onto techniques that the sleep temple priestesses had perfected thousands of years before. The trance induction, the therapeutic use of suggestion, the understanding that the mind and body are connected in ways that can be harnessed for healing. He gave it a new name, wrapped it in the scientific language of his era. But the practice, the core of what he was doing, was as old as Epidaurus. Tonight, we are going to trace the thread forward from the destroyed temples to the modern world. We are going to discover that the wisdom of the sleep temples never entirely died. It went underground, it changed forms, it emerged in unexpected places, and it is still with us, still healing people, still waiting to be fully recognized and reclaimed. Let us start with Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who, in the early 20th century, developed theories about the unconscious mind that would transform psychology. Jung was fascinated by dreams. He believed they were not random neural noise, but meaningful communications from the depths of the psyche. He developed elaborate systems for interpreting dream symbols. He talked about archetypes, about the collective unconscious, about how dreams could guide us toward wholeness and healing. And where did Jung get these ideas? He got them in part from studying the ancient world. He read about the Greek mystery religions, about the healing sanctuaries, about dream incubation at Epidaurus. He even wrote about how his own dreams had guided him through personal crises and creative breakthroughs. Jung created a modern framework for understanding what the ancient priestesses had practiced intuitively. He gave us language, individuation, shadow work, active imagination, for processes that those women knew in their bones. And he trained therapists to work with dreams as sacred material, as messages from the soul that required careful interpretation and deep respect. Jungian therapy, which is still practiced today, is a direct descendant of the sleep temple tradition, whether most Jungian therapists realize it or not. But Jung was not the only one rediscovering this wisdom. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was an explosion of interest in what we now call the unconscious mind. Sigmund Freud, of course, was talking about the unconscious too, though his approach was different from Jung's. Freud was interested in repressed memories, in how psychological trauma manifests as physical symptoms. He called it hysteria, a term loaded with misogyny. It literally means wandering womb, because ancient physicians believed women's psychological problems were caused by their uteruses moving around their bodies, which is obviously ridiculous. But strip away the sexism and Freud was actually onto something important. That unprocessed trauma can lodge in the body, that it can cause real physical pain and disability, that talking about it, bringing it into consciousness, can sometimes relieve those symptoms. Freud initially used hypnosis in his practice. He would put patients into trance states and have them recall traumatic memories. Later he abandoned hypnosis for free association, but the principle remained. Create an altered state of consciousness where the unconscious can speak more freely. This is enkoimesis by another name. This is the sacred sleep adapted for a modern consulting room. And then there is hypnotherapy itself, which has come full circle. The word hypnosis comes from hypnos, the Greek god of sleep. James Braid, a Scottish surgeon, coined the term in 1841. He was studying the trance states induced by mesmerists and trying to understand them scientifically. What he discovered is that trance states can be therapeutic, that suggestions given during hypnosis can affect both psychological and physical conditions. Modern clinical hypnotherapy is now used for pain management, anxiety disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, smoking cessation, and more. It is evidence-based. It is taught in medical schools. It works. And it works through exactly the mechanisms the sleep temple priestesses used. Trance induction, therapeutic suggestion, accessing the unconscious mind. There is a researcher I mentioned earlier, Deirdre Barrett, at Harvard Medical School. She studies dream incubation, the deliberate practice of setting intentions for dreams and using dreams to solve problems or process emotions. She has shown that people can learn to influence their dreams and that these influenced dreams can provide genuine therapeutic benefit. She teaches techniques that are strikingly similar to what happened at Epidaurus. Clarify your intention before sleep, create a calm mental state, use visualization, trust the dreaming mind to do its work. Her research subjects report breakthroughs in creative problems, insights into relationship issues, processing of grief and trauma. This is modern science validating ancient practice. But the echoes of the sleep temples exist in even more unexpected places. Have you heard of Tibetan dream yoga? It is a practice within Tibetan Buddhism where practitioners train themselves to become lucid in their dreams, to recognize that they are dreaming while still asleep. Once lucid, they use the dream state for spiritual practice, for confronting fears, for rehearsing compassion, for exploring the nature of consciousness itself. This tradition is over 1,000 years old, and while it developed independently from the Greek sleep temples, it is based on the same insight, that the dream state is not just random images, but a powerful space for transformation and healing. Or consider the practice of shrine sleep that still exists in some parts of the Middle East and North Africa. Pilgrims come to the tombs of saints or holy sites, sleep there and seek healing through dreams. The Islamic tradition has its own rich history of dream interpretation. The Prophet Muhammad received revelations in dreams. Dreams are considered one of the 46 parts of prophecy, and while the theological framework is different, the practice is remarkably similar. Sacred space, ritual preparation, intentional sleep, dream interpretation by wise guides. Even in the Christian tradition, which officially banned the pagan sleep temples, the practice never entirely disappeared. Medieval Christians would sleep at the shrines of saints seeking healing. The cult of saint relics often involved incubation-like practices, and many Christian mystics, often women, often marginalized by church authorities, reported visions and dreams that guided their spiritual practice and their healing work. Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila. These women were experiencing something that the ancient priestesses would have recognized immediately. So the thread is there, running through history, sometimes visible, sometimes underground, but never completely broken. The understanding that sleep is sacred, that dreams carry wisdom, that healing requires addressing the whole person. This knowledge has survived, adapted, evolved, waiting for us to recognize it and reclaim it. And now, in our current moment, something remarkable is happening. There is a renaissance of interest in holistic healing, in mind-body medicine, in practices that honor both scientific evidence and ancient wisdom. More and more people are recognizing that the conventional medical system, for all its miracles, is missing something essential. It treats symptoms but not root causes. It sees bodies but not souls. It offers pills but not meaning. And women in particular are leading the way back to something deeper. There are modern practitioners who are explicitly reclaiming the title of priestess. Women who are creating healing circles, dream groups, sacred spaces where other women can bring their pain and be met with wisdom and compassion. They are not trying to recreate Epidaurus exactly. We cannot go back and we should not want to. But they are rediscovering the principles, the practices, the understanding that women's healing requires women's wisdom. There are therapists now who work specifically with dreams as a therapeutic tool. They teach clients to keep dream journals, to notice patterns, to engage with dream imagery through art or writing or active imagination. They understand that dreams are not just the brain processing information, but the psyche communicating in its own language, offering insights that the conscious mind cannot access. There are somatic therapies, practices that work with trauma as it is stored in the body. Therapies like EMDR, somatic experiencing, Hakomi, that recognize what the sleep temple priestesses knew, that you cannot heal psychological wounds through talking alone. You have to address the body, the nervous system, the cellular memory of trauma. These therapies create safe containers, use gentle techniques to help people release trauma that has been locked in their bodies for years, sometimes decades. The mechanisms are different. We use eye movements, breath work, mindful awareness rather than sacred snakes and dream incubation. But the principle is the same. Create safety, access altered states, allow the body's wisdom to emerge, facilitate release and integration. There is a growing movement of women teaching other women about cycle awareness, about honoring the rhythms of their bodies, about reclaiming menstruation as a sacred process rather than an inconvenience. They talk about how different phases of the menstrual cycle affect energy, mood, intuition, how the premenstrual phase can be a time of heightened dreaming and insight if we slow down enough to pay attention. This is ancient priestess wisdom, repackaged for the modern world. And there are sleep clinics, finally, where doctors and scientists are taking sleep seriously as a health intervention. They are studying how sleep deprivation affects everything from weight to mental health to immune function. They're developing protocols for sleep hygiene, darkening rooms, removing screens, creating bedtime rituals that sound a lot like the preparation rituals at Epidaurus. They are using aromatherapy, sound therapy, even light therapy to optimize sleep environments. Without knowing it, they are reconstructing elements of the sacred sleep. But here is what I find most exciting. There is research now on the therapeutic use of psychedelics, substances that alter consciousness in profound ways. Psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, used in carefully controlled settings with trained guides, these substances are showing remarkable results for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, end-of-life anxiety, and the mechanisms seem to be similar to what happened in the sleep temples. Ego dissolution, access to deep unconscious material, profound emotional release, integration of traumatic experiences, a sense of connection and meaning that can be life-changing. The guides in these psychedelic therapy sessions, the people who hold space while others journey through altered states, they are playing a role very similar to the priestesses of old. They create sacred space, DC. They prepare participants psychologically. They interpret experiences. They help integrate insights. They understand that healing requires more than just the substance or the technique. It requires the container, the relationship, the framework of meaning. I am not suggesting everyone should go do psychedelics, obviously, but I am pointing out that what we are discovering, what we are rediscovering, is that consciousness is not fixed, that there are states of awareness beyond our ordinary waking mind, that accessing those states in the right context, with the right support, can be profoundly healing. This is what the sleep temples knew, this is what they practiced, and we are, slowly, painfully, finding our way back to it. There is even a movement of people creating intentional dream groups, small gatherings, often of women, who meet regularly to share dreams, to practice interpretation together, to support each other's inner work. These groups are happening in living rooms, community centres, online forums. They are informal, grassroots, not sanctioned by any medical or religious authority. That is part of their power. They are peer-led, community-based Asclepius. They are women reclaiming the practice of dream work from the experts, saying, "We can do this for each other. We can hold this knowledge. We can be guides for each other's healing." Is it perfect? No. Are there risks of inexperienced people doing harm, of spiritual bypassing, of false memories, of all the things that can go wrong when you're working with the deep unconscious? Yes, absolutely. The ancient priestesses trained for 7 years for good reason. This work requires skill, discernment, wisdom, but the impulse, the hunger for it, the recognition that something essential has been missing that is real and valid and important. What moves me most about all these modern echoes is that they are arising organically, independently, in different fields and different communities. Therapists are rediscovering somatic work. Sleep scientists are rediscovering the importance of ritual. Women are rediscovering dream work. Spiritual seekers are rediscovering trance states. It is as if the collective unconscious, to use Jung's term, is calling us back to something we lost. As if we are remembering slowly what was taken from us. The sleep temples are gone. The priestesses are gone. We cannot bring them back. But the need they served is still here. The suffering they addressed is still here. And the wisdom they carried, that wisdom is not lost. It is encoded in our dreams, in our bodies, in the deep knowing that women carry even when they have been told to doubt themselves. It is waiting in the ruins of Epidaurus, in the inscriptions that survived, in the stories that were passed down in whispers and shadows through centuries of suppression. In the next part of our journey, we are going to talk about reclamation, about how modern women are not just finding echoes of the sleep temple tradition, but actively rebuilding it, reimagining it, making it relevant for our time. We are going to explore what it looks like to create sacred sleep in your own life, to honor your dreams, to access the healing power of altered consciousness. And we are going to discover that you do not need to travel to an ancient sanctuary or find an ordained priestess to benefit from this wisdom. You can begin right now, right where you are, to reclaim what was taken, to remember what was forgotten, to practice the lost art of healing through dreams. You do not need to travel to Greece. You do not need to find a temple or a trained priestess or wait for permission from any authority, religious or medical. You can begin tonight, right here, in your own home, in your own bed, with nothing more than intention and a willingness to listen to what your dreams are trying to tell you. This is not about recreating Epidaurus exactly. We live in a different world, with different needs, different understandings, but the core principles, the essential wisdom of the sleep temples, these things are available to anyone who wants to reclaim them. And tonight, I am going to show you how. Let me introduce you to someone. Her name is Sarah, and she is a 38-year-old woman living in Portland, Oregon. She works in marketing, has 2 kids, a partner who travels for work, and chronic migraines that have plagued her for 5 years. She has seen multiple doctors, she has tried medications, supplements, elimination diets, acupuncture, physical therapy. Some things help a little, but nothing makes the migraines go away. And no one, not one of her many healthcare providers, has ever asked her about her sleep or her dreams, or what is happening in her emotional life. 6 months ago, Sarah stumbled across an article about the ancient Greek sleep temples. Something about it resonated with her. She could not stop thinking about those women who travelled to Epidaurus seeking healing. She recognized herself in them, the desperation, the sense that conventional medicine was missing something, the intuition that her migraines were connected to something deeper than just neurology. So she decided to try an experiment. She decided to create her own version of enkoimesis, right there in her ordinary bedroom in Portland. Here is what Sarah did, and here is what you can do too. First, she cleaned her bedroom. This might sound trivial, but it is not. The ancient pilgrims underwent purification rituals before entering the Abaton. They bathed, they changed into clean robes, they shed the dirt and disorder of their journey. Sarah could not build a new temple, but she could make her bedroom a sacred space. She cleared out the clutter, the piles of laundry, the stacks of books, the random stuff that had accumulated. She put away her laptop, her phone, anything that connected her to work or stress or the demands of her daily life. She washed her sheets. She opened the windows to let fresh air in. She was creating a boundary, a threshold between the ordinary world and the space she was dedicating to healing sleep. Next, she established a ritual. Remember how the pilgrims at Epidaurus went through a series of preparations before the sacred sleep? Sarah created her own version. Every night, an hour before bed, she turns off all screens. She takes a bath, not a quick shower, but a real bath with Epsom salts and lavender oil. While she bathes, she lets herself think about what she wants to understand, what she wants to heal. She does not force it, just allows the thoughts to come. Then she gets out, dries off, puts on comfortable clothes designated just for sleep. She makes a cup of herbal tea, chamomile, valerian, something calming, and she spends 15 minutes writing in a journal, not about her day, but about her intention for the night. What does she want to dream about? What question does she want answered? What part of herself does she want to understand better? This is dream incubation. This is what Deirdre Barrett teaches at Harvard, what the priestesses practiced at Epidaurus. You set an intention. You clarify what you are seeking. You do not demand an answer, but you open yourself to the possibility of receiving one. Sarah's bedroom is now her Abaton. She keeps it dark, blackout curtains, no light from electronics. She uses a small diffuser with essential oils, lavender, frankincense, whatever scent feels right to her that night. She has a white noise machine that plays the sound of gentle rain or ocean waves. Remember the fountain in the Abaton, the sacred snakes? She is recreating the sensory environment that induces trance states, that signals to her nervous system, this is a different kind of space. This is where healing happens. Before she lies down, she does something that might sound strange but is incredibly powerful. She speaks to her dreams, out loud. She says something like, I am ready to receive whatever wisdom my dreams want to show me tonight. I am especially curious about the connection between my migraines and my emotional life. Show me what I need to see. Help me understand what I need to understand. This is prayer, yes, but it is also psychological priming. She is telling her unconscious mind what to focus on, what to bring to the surface, and then she sleeps. And she dreams. And in the morning, before she does anything else, before she checks her phone, before she talks to her family, before she lets the day rush in, she writes down her dreams. Everything she can remember, even fragments, even images that do not make sense. She does not try to interpret them immediately. She just records them, honors them, acknowledges that they came. Over weeks and months, patterns emerge. Sarah starts noticing that her migraines often come after dreams about her mother, who was critical and demanding, who made Sarah feel that nothing she did was good enough. She dreams of trying to please someone who cannot be pleased. She dreams of carrying heavy objects up endless stairs. She dreams of her jaw being locked shut, unable to speak, and she begins to understand something her doctors never asked about, that she holds tension in her jaw and her neck, especially when she is stressed, especially when she is trying to meet impossible standards, especially when she is being the good daughter, the good mother, the good employee, always giving, never receiving, never resting. The migraines are her body screaming what her mouth cannot say. Stop! This is too much. You're hurting yourself trying to be what everyone else needs you to be. Armed with this understanding, Sarah makes changes. She starts therapy, specifically somatic therapy, that helps her release the tension she has been carrying in her body. She practices saying no to demands that drain her. She has difficult conversations with her mother about boundaries. She gives herself permission to rest without guilt. And slowly, over months, the migraines decrease in frequency and intensity. They do not disappear entirely, this is not a fairy tale, but they become manageable. And more importantly, Sarah feels different. She feels like she has reclaimed something, a relationship with her own inner wisdom, a trust in her body's messages, a sense that she has agency in her own healing. This is what reclaiming the sleep temple practice can look like in a modern life. It is not about believing in literal gods or performing elaborate rituals you do not connect with. It is about creating the conditions for deep sleep, for meaningful dreams, for listening to what your unconscious is trying to tell you. It is about honoring the connection between your psychological state and your physical health. It is about taking seriously the idea that healing requires more than treating symptoms. Now, let me give you a practical guide, a step-by-step process that anyone can adapt to their own circumstances. Step 1. Create sacred space. You do not need a temple, you need a bedroom that feels safe, clean, separate from the chaos of daily life. Remove clutter, remove screens, add elements that signal to your nervous system that this is a healing space. Soft lighting, calming scents, comfortable bedding. Think of it as creating your own Abaton. Step 2. Develop a bedtime ritual. This is your version of the purification rites. It might be a bath, a shower, washing your face with intention. It might be gentle stretching or yoga. It might be reading poetry or listening to calm music. The point is to create a transition, a boundary between the stress of the day and the sacred time of sleep. Do the same things in the same order every night. Your nervous system will learn. This sequence means safety, means rest, means healing. Step 3. Practice dream incubation. Before you sleep, set an intention. What do you want to understand? What do you want to heal? Write it down, speak it aloud if that feels right. You're not demanding that your dreams comply, you're simply opening a door, inviting your unconscious to share its wisdom. Step 4. Optimize your sleep environment. Dark room, cool temperature, minimal noise or white noise if you prefer it. No screens for at least an hour before bed. The blue light disrupts your circadian rhythm and suppresses melatonin. Consider aromatherapy. Lavender has been scientifically shown to improve sleep quality. Make your bed comfortable, your blanket soft. This is not indulgence, this is medicine. Step 5. Keep a dream journal. This is crucial. Keep it by your bed. When you wake, before you move, before you think about your day, Write down whatever you remember from your dreams. Do not edit, do not judge, and do not try to make sense of it yet. Just record. Over time, you will start to notice patterns, recurring symbols, themes that connect to your waking life. Step 6. Learn to interpret your own dreams. There are books that can help, Jungian guides to dream symbols, contemporary books on dream work. But remember what the priestesses knew. Your dreams are uniquely yours. A snake might mean healing for one person and fear for another. Pay attention to how symbols make you feel. What associations arise, what memories surface. Trust your own interpretation more than any experts. Step 7. Take action on the dream insights. This is where the healing actually happens. If your dreams are showing you that you are carrying unprocessed grief, find a way to grieve. If they are showing you that a relationship is toxic, address it. If they are showing you that you are ignoring your own needs, start meeting them. Dreams without action are just interesting stories. Dreams with action become transformation. Step 8. Find community if you can. This was essential at the sleep temples. Women healing together, witnessing each other's journeys. You might start or join a dream group, even a small one. 2 or 3 friends who meet monthly to share dreams and support each other's interpretations. Or you might find a therapist who works with dreams, or an online community. Healing in isolation is harder than healing in connection. Now, I want to address something important. This practice is not a replacement for medical care. If you have a serious health condition, please see a doctor. Take your medications. Get the tests you need. But this practice can complement medical care. It can address the layers that conventional medicine often misses, the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual. It can help you understand your symptoms in a fuller context. It can activate your own healing capacities. And for women specifically, this practice can be profoundly empowering. Because so often women's symptoms are dismissed, minimized, attributed to stress or hormones or hysteria in its modern forms. Women are told their pain is not real, or it is all in their head, or they just need to relax. And while yes, psychological factors do affect physical health, that does not make the pain any less real or valid. What dreamwork offers is a way to honor both dimensions, to say yes, this pain is real, and yes, it might be connected to emotional or psychological factors, and that is important information, not a dismissal. Let me share one more story. A woman named Maria, in her 50s, who'd been experiencing anxiety so severe that she could barely leave her house. She had tried medication which helped some, but left her feeling numb. She started practicing dream incubation, asking her dreams to show her the root of her anxiety. She had a powerful dream in which she was a little girl, hiding in a closet while her parents fought violently in the next room. She woke up and realized, this is not just anxiety, this is unprocessed childhood trauma. Her adult anxiety was triggered by conflict, by loud noises, by situations that unconsciously reminded her of those terrifying nights in the closet. With this understanding, she sought trauma therapy. She did EMDR to process those memories. She learned that her anxiety had a cause, a history, and that understanding that history gave her power over it. She still has anxiety sometimes, but it no longer controls her life. And it was her dreams, her own unconscious wisdom that showed her the path to healing. This is available to you. This wisdom, this practice, this connection to the deep healing power of dreams and sacred sleep. It is your birthright. Not because you are special, but because you are human. Because for thousands of years, this is what humans did. We honored sleep. We listened to dreams. We created rituals and sacred spaces around the mystery of consciousness and healing. And then we forgot. or we were made to forget. The temples were destroyed, the priestesses silenced, the knowledge suppressed. But it was never entirely lost, because it lives in us, in our bodies, in our dreams, in the deep knowing that wakes us up at 3 a.m. with an insight we could not access during the day. You do not need permission to reclaim this. You do not need credentials or ordination or anyone's approval. You just need willingness. Willingness to take your sleep seriously. Willingness to pay attention to your dreams. Willingness to trust that your unconscious mind is wiser than you know. Willingness to create space in your life for the sacred, for the mysterious, for the healing that happens in the dark. And if you are thinking, I do not have time for this, I am too busy, my life is too chaotic, I understand, I really do. But consider this. The women who travelled to Epidaurus were busy too. They had families, responsibilities, lives that demanded their attention. But they made the journey anyway because they understood that without healing, without rest, without addressing what was broken in them, they could not truly live. They could not truly serve. They could not truly be whole. What would it mean for you to make that journey? Not to Greece, but to your own inner Epidaurus, to the sacred space within you where healing is possible. What would it mean to honour your sleep as the ancient world honoured it? Not as downtime, not as unconsciousness, not as the absence of productivity, but as a state of profound importance where your body repairs itself, your mind processes experience, your soul speaks its truth. In our final part, we are going to bring everything together. We are going to reflect on what this whole journey has taught us, about ancient wisdom, about women's healing, about what we lost and what we can reclaim. We are going to talk about the political dimensions of sleep and dreams, about why reclaiming these practices is not just personal, but collective, not just healing, but revolutionary. And we are going to imagine a future where the wisdom of the sleep temples is not forgotten history, but living practice where every woman has access to the kind of deep holistic healing that those ancient priestesses provided. There is something radical about sleep, something subversive about a woman closing her eyes and declaring that for the next 8 hours she will not be available. Not to her children, not to her partner, not to her employer, not to her endless to-do list, not to the world's demands on her time and energy and body. Sleep is a refusal, sleep is resistance. And in a culture that glorifies exhaustion, that treats rest as laziness, that measures a woman's worth by her productivity, choosing to prioritize sleep, choosing to treat it as sacred rather than as a luxury you can afford only when everything else is done, that is a political act. The ancient priestesses understood this, though they would not have used the word political. They understood that women's bodies are battlegrounds, that women's time is constantly colonized, that women's pain is systematically dismissed. And they created spaces where, for a few nights at least, women could escape all of that, where they could rest deeply, dream freely, be witnessed and honoured and taken seriously, where their suffering mattered, where their healing was the priority. This was not just medicine, this was sanctuary in the truest sense, a refuge from a world that was often hostile to women's well-being. And when those sanctuaries were destroyed, when the priestesses were banned and the practices forbidden, what was being destroyed was not just a medical system, it was women's autonomy, it was women's spiritual authority, it was spaces where women's wisdom and women's ways of knowing were valued above male expertise and male control. Think about what replaced the sleep temples. Male physicians who barely looked at female patients, who refused to examine their bodies, who attributed all women's ailments to the wandering womb, or hysteria, or moral weakness. A medical system that for centuries treated women as defective men, that used male bodies as the standard and considered female physiology as deviation. a religious system that told women their pain was punishment for Eve's sin, that they should suffer in sadness, that seeking relief was vanity or weakness. The destruction of the sleep temples was part of a larger pattern of eroding women's power, and we are still living with the consequences. Consider this. Even today, in our supposedly advanced medical system, women's pain is undertreated compared to men's. Study after study shows that women wait longer in emergency rooms, receive less pain medication, have their symptoms attributed to anxiety or emotional problems more often than men with identical complaints. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with psychosomatic disorders, more likely to be told it is all in their heads. Women with endometriosis wait an average of 7 to 10 years for diagnosis. Women having heart attacks are misdiagnosed as having panic attacks. Women's autoimmune diseases, which disproportionately affect women, are chronically under-researched and underfunded. This is not ancient history. This is now. This is the legacy of a system that, starting with the destruction of the sleep temples and continuing through centuries of medical patriarchy, has trained us to not trust women, not trust women's reports of their own experiences, not trust women's intuition about their own bodies, not trust women's ways of knowing and healing. And sleep specifically has become another arena where women are set up to fail. We live in a culture of sleep deprivation. The Centers for Disease Control calls insufficient sleep a public health epidemic, but it affects women disproportionately. Women are more likely than men to have insomnia, to be awakened by children or partners needing care, to sacrifice their own sleep to meet others' needs. Working mothers get on average an hour less sleep per night than working fathers. And then we are told that our exhaustion is our own fault, a failure of time management, a personal weakness rather than a structural problem. The ancient world understood that sleep was sacred, that dreams were wisdom, that rest was essential. Our world treats sleep as wasted time, as something to be optimized, hacked, minimized. How little sleep can you function on? How many hours can you squeeze out of the day? There are productivity gurus who brag about sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, who treat rest as something only the weak need. And this attitude is literally killing us. Sleep deprivation is linked to every major chronic disease: heart disease, diabetes, obesity, depression, dementia. It suppresses immune function, accelerates aging, impairs judgment. It is a public health crisis, but instead of addressing it structurally, we blame individuals for not practicing better sleep hygiene, as if personal choices can overcome systemic problems. What would it mean to reclaim sleep as a right rather than a privilege? To demand that workplaces respect the need for rest, that schools start later so teenagers can sleep adequately, that new parents receive genuine support rather than being expected to function on broken sleep for years? What would it mean to say that sleep is not something you earn by being productive enough, but something every human being deserves because we're alive? This is where reclaiming the wisdom of the sleep temples becomes political. Because when you start taking your own sleep seriously, when you start honoring your dreams as meaningful, when you start trusting your body's wisdom over external experts, you are challenging a system that profits from your exhaustion and your self-doubt. There is a reason that sleep deprivation is used as a torture technique. Because when you cannot sleep, when you cannot rest, when you cannot access that deeper consciousness where integration and healing happen, you break. You lose yourself, you become compliant, suggestible, unable to resist. And while no one is deliberately torturing modern women, the effect of chronic sleep deprivation is similar. We are walking through our lives in a state of perpetual stress, perpetual depletion, unable to think clearly, unable to access our full capacities, unable to resist the demands placed on us because we are too tired to fight back. Rested women are dangerous women. Women who sleep deeply, who dream vividly, who listen to their intuition, who trust their own knowing. These are women who cannot be easily controlled. These are women who might start asking questions. Why am I so exhausted? Why am I doing all the emotional labor in my relationships? Why is my pain not taken seriously? Why am I expected to be endlessly available? Why do I feel guilty for resting? These are dangerous questions. These are questions that lead to change. The ancient priestesses were dangerous too, in their own way. They held power that did not come from men. They had authority that was not granted by patriarchal institutions. They knew things, understood things, could do things that threatened the emerging order of male control. And so they were eliminated, not overnight, not through a single dramatic purge, but slowly, systematically, through laws and edicts and cultural shifts that made their practice impossible, that labelled them as superstitious or evil or obsolete. But here is what those who destroyed the temples did not understand. You cannot actually kill knowledge that lives in the body. You cannot legislate away intuition. You cannot ban dreams. The practices went underground, but they did not disappear. Women kept passing down remedies, kept interpreting each other's dreams, kept creating spaces for rest and healing in whatever ways they could. It looked different. Kitchen table conversations instead of temple rituals, herbal knowledge whispered between generations instead of formal training, dream journals hidden in bedside tables instead of inscriptions on stone. But the essence remained. And now we are at a moment of reclamation. Women all over the world are waking up, literally and figuratively, to what was taken from us. We are recognizing that the exhaustion we feel is not personal failure but systemic oppression. We are reclaiming practices that honor our bodies, our cycles, our intuition. We are creating new versions of the old sanctuaries, online communities, healing circles, retreat spaces, therapeutic practices that integrate body and mind and spirit. And we are angry, appropriately angry about the centuries of dismissal and suppression, angry about the healers who were burned as witches, angry about the knowledge that was lost, angry about the women who suffered and died because the wisdom that could have helped them had been declared heretical. This anger is valid. This anger is fuel. This anger is part of the healing. But anger alone is not enough. We also need to build. We need to create. We need to practice. We need to say, they tried to destroy this, but we are bringing it back. Not exactly as it was. We cannot and should not try to recreate the ancient world, but in forms that work for our time, our context, our needs. What would a modern sleep temple look like? Maybe it would be a retreat center where women could come for a weekend or a week, could unplug from their ordinary lives, could sleep and dream and rest without guilt or interruption. Maybe it would be a network of therapists trained in dream work and somatic healing, working with the same understanding the priestesses had, that body and psyche are inseparable. Maybe it would be a political movement demanding structural changes, parental leave that actually allows for rest, universal health care that includes mental health and holistic therapies, work schedules that respect circadian rhythms, living wages that do not require people to work themselves to exhaustion. Maybe it would be all of these things. Maybe it already is, in scattered form, waiting to be connected and amplified and recognized for what it is, a renaissance of ancient wisdom, a reclamation of what was stolen, a revolution of rest. And this brings me to something important. This work is not just for women. The sleep temples primarily served women, yes, and the priestesses were women, and the particular wisdom of how to heal female bodies and female suffering was their specialty. But men suffered too when these practices were lost. Men also need deep rest, meaningful dreams, spaces to process trauma, communities of healing. The patriarchal systems that destroyed the sleep temples and banned the priestesses, these systems harm everyone. They create a world where no one can truly rest, where everyone is measured by productivity, where vulnerability is weakness, where asking for help is failure. So when we reclaim the wisdom of the sleep temples, we are not just healing women, we are healing the culture. We are saying that there is another way to be human, another way to relate to our bodies and our minds and each other, a way that honors rest, that values intuition, that creates space for the mysterious and the non-rational and the deeply personal work of transformation. But make no mistake, this is women's work to lead, because we are the ones who carry the lineage, even if it was broken. We are the ones who remember, in our bodies, if not in our conscious minds, what it felt like to have our wisdom valued, our authority recognized, our ways of knowing respected. We are the ones who have the most to gain from reclaiming this, and the most to lose if we do not. And we are the ones who are doing it. All over the world, women are creating dream circles, teaching workshops on sacred sleep, training as somatic therapists and holistic healers, writing books about feminine spirituality and body wisdom and the power of rest. Some explicitly reference the ancient priestesses. Others may not know the history, but they are channeling the same energy, the same understanding, the same commitment to healing that is whole and deep and honors the fullness of human experience. This is not fringe. This is not woo-woo nonsense for people who reject science. This is the cutting edge of healing. This is where the most interesting, most effective, most humane healthcare is happening, in the spaces where ancient wisdom meets modern understanding, where technology serves healing rather than replacing it, where we honor both what can be measured and what can only be felt. I want you to understand something. If you are drawn to this work, if this story of the sleep temples has touched something in you, if you feel a longing for the kind of deep holistic healing we've been talking about, that is not random. That is not coincidence. That is recognition. That is your own deep wisdom, the wisdom that has been passed down through thousands of years of women's bodies, saying, yes, this is what we need. This is what was taken. This is what we are reclaiming. You are part of this reclamation, whether you know it or not. Every time you prioritize your sleep over productivity, every time you pay attention to your dreams, every time you trust your body's signals over external authority, every time you create space for another woman to share her pain and you witness it without judgment or trying to fix it, every time you say no to demands that drain you, every time you rest without guilt, you're practicing what the priestesses practiced. You're honoring what the sleep temples honored. You're participating in a revolution that is happening one dream, one night of sacred sleep, one woman at a time. And this brings us to our final question, the question that has been building through this entire journey. What now? We have traced the history from ancient goddesses to banned priestess, from destroyed temples to modern rediscovery. We have understood the science, explored the practices, recognized the political dimensions. We have seen what was lost and what is being reclaimed. So what do we do with all of this? How do we take this knowledge and these practices and these insights and actually change our lives, change our culture, change the world? That is what we will explore in our final moments together, not as an ending, but as a beginning. We have travelled a long way together tonight. We began in ancient Greece, watching Helena walk the sacred road to Epidaurus, her body aching, her hope fragile. We descended into underground Hypogea in Malta, stood beside the sleeping lady who has been dreaming for 5,000 years. We met the priestesses, women like Thea and Nicaea and Callista, who dedicated their lives to the art of healing through dreams. We witnessed the destruction, felt the loss, traced the thread of survival through centuries of suppression. And we arrived here now in this moment where something ancient is stirring again, where women are remembering what was taken and reclaiming what is theirs. So what now? What do we do with this knowledge, this history, this invitation to something deeper? I want to tell you one last story. Her name is not important. She could be any of us. She is a woman in her 40s who has spent most of her adult life feeling like she is not quite enough, not successful enough, not thin enough, not serene enough with her children, not passionate enough with her partner, not spiritual enough, not productive enough. She is always striving, always pushing, always trying to be better, do more, prove her worth. And she is exhausted, bone deep exhausted in a way that no amount of coffee or exercise or positive thinking can touch. One night, after years of this grinding effort, she has a dream. In the dream, she is trying to climb a mountain, but she is carrying an enormous backpack filled with stones. The backpack is so heavy she can barely move. She keeps climbing anyway, because that is what you do, right? You keep going. But then she hears a voice. She cannot tell if it is her own voice or someone else's. Maybe it is the mountain itself speaking, and the voice says, "You can put it down." And she realizes the backpack is not locked to her body. The stones are not glued to her hands. She has been choosing to carry this weight, and she can choose right now to set it down. So she does. In the dream, she lets the backpack slide off her shoulders. It hits the ground with a heavy thud, and she feels so light she could float. She wakes up crying, but not sad crying, relief crying, release crying. The crying that happens when something that has been clenched tight for years finally lets go. That dream changed her life. Not because it magically solved all her problems, but because it showed her something she had not been able to see while awake, that she was the one carrying the stones, that the pressure, the impossible standards, the constant striving, much of it was coming from inside her own mind, from stories she had internalized about what a good woman should be. And if she was carrying it, she could put it down. She started small. She stopped checking her work email after dinner. She said no to a volunteer commitment she'd never wanted to do in the first place. She let her house be messy sometimes. She went to bed when she was tired instead of staying up to finish one more thing. And with each small act of putting down the stones, she felt a little lighter, a little more herself, a little more alive. This is what reclaiming the lost art of sleep temples can offer us, not a magic cure. Not a promise that all your problems will disappear if you just dream hard enough, but a different way of being in relationship with yourself, with your suffering, with your healing, a way that honors your whole self, body, mind, emotions, spirit, dreams, a way that says you're worth resting for, your dreams are worth listening to, your wisdom is worth trusting. So here is what I am asking you to do, starting tonight. First, I am asking you to take your sleep seriously, not as a luxury you will get to when everything else is done, but as a foundation of your health and your life. Protect it, prioritize it, create rituals around it, make your bedroom a sanctuary, turn off your screens an hour before bed, let yourself rest without guilt. This is not selfish, this is essential. Second, I am asking you to pay attention to your dreams. Keep a journal by your bed. Write down what you remember in the morning. You do not have to analyze every symbol or find deep meaning in every image. Just notice, just record, just honor the fact that your dreaming mind is trying to tell you something. Over time, patterns will emerge, insights will come. Trust the process. Third, I am asking you to listen to your body. It is speaking to you all the time. That chronic pain, that digestive issue, that mysterious symptom the doctors cannot quite explain. What if it is not a malfunction? What if it is a message? What if your body is trying to tell you something about how you are living, what you're carrying, what needs to change? You do not have to figure it out alone. Seek help. Therapists, body workers, practitioners who understand the mind-body connection. But start by listening. Fourth, I am asking you to find your people. Healing happens in community. The sleep temples were not just about individual treatment. They were gathering places, communities of women supporting each other through suffering and transformation. You need that too. Find or create a dream circle. Join a women's group. Connect with others who are on this path of reclamation. Share your dreams, your struggles, your insights. Witness and be witnessed. Fifth, I am asking you to trust your own knowing. You have intuition, wisdom, a sense of what is true for you that does not come from experts or authorities or the rational mind. That knowing is real. It is valuable. It has been suppressed and doubted and dismissed for centuries, but it has not been destroyed. Practice listening to it. Practice trusting it. Practice acting on it, even when it goes against what you've been taught you should do, or be, or want. Sixth, I am asking you to remember the priestesses, not as distant historical figures, but as your ancestors in healing. They held this knowledge for you. They preserved it through persecution and suppression so that it could come back to you now when you need it. When you practice sacred sleep, when you interpret your dreams, when you create healing space for yourself or others, you are continuing their work. You're part of a lineage that stretches back thousands of years, and finally I am asking you to imagine what would be possible if we all did this. If millions of women started taking their sleep seriously, honoring their dreams, trusting their bodies, supporting each other's healing. If we stopped trying to be superhuman and started allowing ourselves to be fully human. If we refused to participate in systems that profit from our exhaustion and our self-doubt. If we created new structures, new communities, new ways of living that put rest and healing and wholeness at the center instead of at the margins. What would the world look like? What would healthcare look like if it honored the mind-body-spirit connection the way the sleep temples did? What would work look like if it respected our need for rest? What would relationships look like if we brought our whole selves, including our dreams and our darkness and our depth? What would parenting look like if we modeled rest and self-care instead of martyrdom and depletion? I do not have all the answers. No one does. We are in the process of figuring this out together, of rediscovering and reinventing and reclaiming. But I know this. The wisdom of the sleep temples is not dead. It has been sleeping, like the ancient priestesses themselves, waiting to be awakened. And it is waking up now, in you, in me, in women all over the world who are tired of being tired, who are ready for something deeper, who are brave enough to close their eyes and trust what their dreams might show them. The sleep temples fell 2,000 years ago. But tonight, right now, you can build a new one. In your bedroom, in your heart, in your commitment to honor your sleep and your dreams and your deep embodied wisdom. You do not need anyone's permission. You do not need special training or ancient lineage or mystical experiences. You just need to begin. Tonight, when you lie down to sleep, remember Helena. Remember the sleeping lady of Malta. Remember Thea and Nicaea and Callista, and all the unnamed priestesses whose names we will never know but whose work continues through us. Remember the women who came to the sanctuaries carrying pain and left carrying hope. Remember that for 4,000 years, women sought healing through sacred sleep and dreams, and it worked. Not because of magic, but because they created the conditions, physical, psychological, spiritual, where healing could happen. You can create those conditions too. You can make your sleep sacred. You can honor your dreams. You can heal. Not perfectly, not all at once, not without setbacks and struggles, but truly, deeply, in a way that changes not just your symptoms, but your whole relationship with yourself and your life. This is the lost art of sleep temples, and it is found again every time a woman closes her eyes with intention, every time she writes down a dream, every time she listens to her body's wisdom, every time she chooses rest over productivity, every time she trusts herself. The priestesses are gone, but their knowledge lives on, in you, in your dreams, in the quiet voice that speaks when everything else is silent. Listen to that voice, trust it, follow where it leads, and know that you are not alone. You are part of a lineage, a movement, a revolution of women who are reclaiming what was taken, rebuilding what was destroyed, remembering what was forgotten. The temples were destroyed, but the practice survives. The priestesses were silenced, but the wisdom speaks. The tradition was broken, but the thread remains, fragile but unbroken, leading us back to something ancient and essential and profoundly needed in our fractured, exhausted world. Sleep is sacred. Dreams are wisdom. You are the temple. You are the priestess. You are the one you've been waiting for. So tonight, sleep well, dream deeply, and when you wake, remember what you have learned here. Remember that healing is possible. Remember that you carry ancient wisdom in your very cells. Remember that rest is resistance and dreams are revolution, and women who sleep deeply are women who cannot be controlled. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning, your beginning, our beginning. The beginning of something that the world tried to destroy but could not, because it lives in us, in our bodies, in our dreams, in our unshakable knowing that there is another way to be, to heal, to live. May you sleep peacefully tonight. May your dreams speak truth to you. May you wake tomorrow a little more whole, a little more yourself, a little more connected to the long line of women who came before you and the countless women who will come after. All of us finding our way back to the lost art that was never truly lost, only waiting, always waiting for us to remember. Thank you for taking this journey with me tonight. Thank you for listening, for staying, for opening yourself to this story and all it carries. I hope it has given you something, comfort, insight, inspiration, permission, or simply the knowledge that you are not alone in your seeking, your suffering, your desire for deeper healing. If this story touched you, if it resonated with something in your soul, I invite you to share it. Tell another woman about the sleep temples. Start a conversation about dreams. Create a small ritual around your own sleep. Every act of reclamation, no matter how small, matters. Every woman who wakes up to this wisdom strengthens the thread, rebuilds the temple, carries the lineage forward, and please come back. There are more stories to tell, more history to uncover, more wisdom to reclaim. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your dreams, your own experiences with sacred sleep. Tell me where you are listening from. What resonated most? What questions this raised for you? I read every comment, and your reflections become part of the story too, part of the community we are building here. Until we meet again, in the next story, the next journey, the next exploration of what was lost and what can be found, sleep well, dream deeply, and trust the wisdom that speaks in the darkness. The priestesses are watching, the temples are rising, and you, beloved listener, you are part of it all. Good night.